So if you had to shortlist top 5 books that you reread, not just read.
There's this one book called A Field Guide to Getting Lost by this author called Rebecca Solnit. I quite like that. I mean, it's exactly what the title says. And a lot of it is about how we encounter knowledge when we're just sort of moving through terrains, without a lot of, let's say, backup as such, right? Like it's just your curiosity and some kind of strange feeling that's taking you.
That stage, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I really like that. And there's this book which has recently been added to my list. It's called The Covenant of Water. So that's fiction. And it's set in Kerala during a very interesting period. And it's written, it's a surgeon who's the author of this book. And he has painted a very interesting social picture of Kerala at that point of time when medicine was not freely available to people. And basically through the life of 4 generations of a family, he traces the history of a state, which I thought was incredible. And since I'm from there, that's the first book I read in English, which felt like I could hear it in Malayalam.
Wow.
So I think he did something great there, and I'm still trying to figure out how he managed that.
Mm-hmm.
So his name is Abraham Verghese. That was nice. I also, like a lot of children's books because I feel like the illustrations in the children's books are amazing. And I hate calling them children's books because I feel like there's something so powerful about a beautiful drawing that can communicate. So a lot of those. There's this book called In Praise of Shadows.
Mm-hmm.
That's by, again, a non-architect, but an incredible author, Japanese Junichiro Tanizaki.
Wow.
And he only has, it's basically a very long essay about how Japanese people think about what their spaces should be like.
Mm-hmm.
In architecture school, we listen to so much about light. We look at shade as something which is, a facility. We don't look at it as something that is also there
part of the structure
to be dealt with, right?
Wow.
So I love the way he talks about that. Like simple things like he talks about how important it is to, when you're eating, right, your utensils should be the kind that don't create friction in your mind. So like, for example, imagine a steel spoon clattering on a steel plate versus a wooden spoon in a wooden bowl. What would give you more quiet when you're eating? So things like that. I never thought about all that until I read that book.
Nice.
Yeah. So these are some of my favorites, but there are quite a few that I keep going back to.
Okay, ready? Audio is recording. Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Today I'm at Wadiyar Center for Architecture at Mysore. Today I'm sitting with Krishnapriya, who has spent 8 years teaching here, and we are going to have a conversation on what it means to study architecture here for 5 years. So if you are an architecture student or thinking of becoming one, I think you would find this conversation useful. So let's begin. Ready?
Yes.
Yes. So you have been teaching here for 8 years.
Yep.
So what made you stay?
Good question. Because I didn't think I would last as long as I did. So I came to teach here because my teachers started the school, right? And I was at a point where obviously I had completed my undergrad, and my undergrad journey wasn't exactly what, I'm nostalgic about. When I got out of college, I didn't even know if I wanted anything to do with architecture. And not that that's a question that's gone away, but I didn't want to even be associated with the space. But I always liked what architecture introduced me to, right? And I always loved visiting places and, just sort of wandering through spaces. All of that was great. So I wrote for a while, and I felt like there were huge gaps in my knowledge, which really wasn't, a very good feeling. And that's when I thought, okay, maybe now is when I do a master's, right? And I ended up pursuing my master's, and Honestly, I had no set plan. It's around that time that I heard that these 11 people had gotten together and started a college, and at least 4 of those people were people who had taught me, and probably the only part of my undergrad education that I remember, because they used to be visiting faculty, right? And I was very excited by that, and I felt like, okay, maybe this is a sort of a place that I should be part of because I have faith in what they could do. Also, it gave me an opportunity to come back to Mysore because I studied in Mysore, and I love the city. It's an incredible city. It lets you live. You know what I mean? Like you're not stuck in commute. You get to see the sky. You get to see trees. You get to see the sunset every day.
Amazing people.
Yeah. Mysore can also have a very conservative side to it, but there is an equally very vibrant and interesting side. So I came back for the city and for the, I guess, opportunity to work with the people who taught me. I thought it would be a short stop, but I'm still here. It's mostly, I think, the space that is provided here and, of course, the city that keeps me here.
So what did you think teaching would be before joining and what it is now?
So this was not the first place I taught. I taught at another school before this, also in Mysore. I think for me, in the initial years, it was large. I wondered how much of the syllabus should control me. Because in my first year teaching, I was quite controlled by the syllabus, and I would feel very anxious about ticking all the boxes set out in the syllabus that we receive from a university, right? We may or may not agree that it's important to teach, but you still have to do it. But the more I've been teaching, the more I've been able to appreciate the fact that the syllabus is just a starting point, like, because it's something that many colleges follow, right? So it provides like a, let's say, a median or a baseline even, I would say, not even a median from where you can begin. But then it is truly about how you enrich that with something that is more current, or even if it is, let's say, looking at a certain period of history, it's basically, I feel like teaching is about how many different perspectives can you bring onto the table, right? And the more perspectives there are, the better. I've received differing perspectives about this from students. There are a lot of students who feel like that too many perspectives are confusing. They wouldn't know what to choose, but I feel like that's the point, that you need to be well and truly confused and thereby sort of seek your own clarity.
Choose your philosophy or principles.
Yes. Like you need to know that all of these options are available to you. I think when you try it out, you realize what you're more inclined towards, or, you realize what your natural talents are sort of leading you towards. And it's also very interesting when you realize that, what are the limitations of your natural talents, and therefore how else can. So for me personally, I think teaching is about opening up perspectives.
Nice.
Yeah.
So if you were to help me visualize that, putting perspectives on table, and students' talent would lead them to pick the perspectives. So how would you help me visualize it?
Let's say from your third semester onwards, you're largely looking at places, right? And everybody has a different perspective on what that place requires, right? In the sense that we usually spend, let's say, about anywhere between a week to 2 weeks if we are traveling to go somewhere to, just sort of be there and take it in and, record our observations and things like that. And people come back with different perspectives, right? Like, for example, if you visit something very, a setting that is still very traditional and rural, someone might come back saying that all this place needs this infrastructure. Somebody else might come back and say, it's changing too fast and we need to, arrest the pace of change and continue building a certain way. Somebody else might say, this place requires change because the people here desire change. And the funny thing is that you can see logic in all of those perspectives. And I think for us also the challenge in teaching lies in, is it possible to balance these somewhere, right? Like, without stifling somebody's thought process. and also while ensuring that it's not a lazy thought process. Because, for example, if I have asked you to extend a house for, let's say, a family, right? A family house needs an extension. So one of the biggest decisions that any architect has to make is how is that going to feel, right? Or how is it going to look? I think when you discuss your ideas with at least 4 different faculty in studio, you will definitely end up with at least 4 different perspectives, no matter, the fact that we're running the same studio.
Right.
So I think that is one way of looking at it. Another thing is, like, I teach a lot of history, right? And I feel like it is very important when you're looking at a particular time period to know what else might have been happening elsewhere in the world, so that we are able to see ourselves as more connected entities rather than, focusing on just one thing and glorifying that. So, and what often gets neglected when you're talking about, let's say, world history or European history is what was happening in India, or what was happening in South America, or what was happening in some unheard of place, right? So I feel like that's what we mean when we say differing perspectives, because I open one door for you, but you need to sort of use it as an opportunity to look across.
What do you call a good thought and what do you call a lazy thought?
If I had to continue that same analogy, lazy thinking would be, let's say, going somewhere and saying that, okay, everybody litters over here. It's very dirty. When you ask, because that's how the discussions will open up. Like, okay, what are the issues that you observe, or what did you find interesting in this place, right? I think it's lazy thinking when you don't ask yourself why you found it interesting. Like, okay, that's the starting point, that you found, let's say, the fact that people use a certain part of a ghat for bathing versus a certain part for, let's say, holy rituals, right? It is important to ask, why have these parts emerged, right? Is it something to do with a belief system over there? Is it a practice? Is it something to do with just current, Is it just like a very straightforward response to, let's say, the flow of water? Or is there some legend associated with it? So I feel like when observations don't go beyond mere observations, it stays at that lazy point. But when that observation leads you to a deeper search, irrespective of what answers you might find at the end of that, I think that is a more rigorous form of engaging with something, right? Like, it's like a simple thing, like in a context that experiences a lot of rain, it is commonsensical that you create sloped roofs. But how do you decide what slope is right? And how do you decide if the roof is going to do something besides just sheltering? Do you realize that it has a form on the outside and a form on the inside? Therefore, how do you make this decision? And can you try a few times before arriving upon what you think is the right answer? So I feel like it's beautiful when it's iterative.
So what does a good day of teaching feel like and look like?
A good day of teaching feels like a day with definitely no grading. I think a good day of teaching for me is, like a nice lecture to start the day off, where people are awake and asking you questions and you're not listening to the sound of your own voice. There's a lot of discussions, there's a lot of conversation, and I personally feel invigorated on the days where I have had good conversations with people, because it is that kind of a course where there is a lot of one-on-one interaction, and those one-on-one interactions are very valuable. So I keep telling students to not be scared of those interactions, and it's important to keep it real in those interactions. They're not for the purpose of just telling you that what you're doing is good and right, but also to get you to, keep interrogating what you're doing, right? So for me, yeah, that's a good day of teaching,
So students ask questions in the day of AI. I mean, you have been in this field for 8 years.
Yeah.
So you have seen post and pre-AI.
Yeah.
Have you seen the decline in curiosity, or do students ask questions these days? And what is if you have to make a quantitative study on the number of questions they ask, or even the qualitative studies? So if you have any opinion on that?
I do feel like curiosity is on a decline, but that is because of the misconception that this real world experience is not giving you anything that a search can give you, right? In the sense that I don't think the purpose of asking questions is just to uncover facts, because most of us don't know what to do with those facts. But perspective is something that a Google search cannot give you, right? You need perspective to be able to make sound decisions. And yes, I have noticed a decline in that, desire to, let's say, ask questions loudly in class. But there's also, I don't know, maybe I tell myself these things to stay more optimistic and to remain in the field. But I also take heart if, after the session, they're willing to hang around and ask questions then, even if they can't do it in an open forum. So there is definitely a decline, but I don't know. I don't see it as an outcome of AI alone. It's also because even when we were studying, we were in that sort of a transitionary generation where suddenly we had a lot more access to the information that maybe the previous 2-3 generations of researchers or scholars would not have had access to, right? Like, a lot more can be accessed in a virtual space, which I think is incredible because it opens up other parts of the world to you without you physically having to go there. So I still believe that your curiosity doesn't have to take a hit just because the AI is around. Each of these tools are there for different purposes, and honestly, you can integrate them into your processes without losing some essential, qualities. I do think.
Is there a moment you had with the students that reminded you why you teach?
Okay, I've had a few of those, right? Fortunately, a lot of my history classes have been like that. Maybe it could also be because I entered the class with a lot of curiosity myself, because I felt like I have learned so much more in the process of teaching, and at no point of time have I ever felt like the teacher. I've always felt like someone who's going in with a set of, let's say, there are some facts and there are my perspectives on those facts, and I ideally would like you to, sort of debate me on those. We've had some fantastic debates in class. So I also teach basic design in first year. I do a writing elective over here. I do a culture and built environment elective over here. Nice. And the electives are also these interesting spaces where, for starters, we don't have a very rigid grading system in electives. It's more to do with participation than with, outcomes. So in those, I have felt like, ironically, the ones where the grading systems are a little loose, you find some incredible work emerging, right? And some very interesting perspectives. There was this one public architecture semester where we chose Calicut as a context. We had chosen this context, which was in the middle of 2 of the oldest mosques in India. And a lot of people don't know that these are the oldest mosques in India, among the oldest. They're even older than the structures in Delhi, right? And the thing is, students who go from Karnataka to Kerala, there's this idea of a Kalyani and a temple tank, and you always associate a large tank only with a temple. But here they were very intrigued to see a fantastic tank between 2 mosques. And that itself was a bit of a, I wouldn't call it a culture shock, but something very interesting and new. And the other thing was that it was secular. It was not a religious tank. And they had also had this beautiful wall with, the history of Calicut as a, very important port on the West Coast. Like, they had that put up there on copper plates. So that whole setting was fantastic. And I felt like in that particular studio, we were able to ask a lot of questions that emerged from the place itself purely because we picked that place, right? And these questions came from the students. There were people, they were like, wow, this is a beautiful public place. We see vibrant life here till late in the night, till like 9-11, which is rare in Kerala, that too in a small town part of the city. But we don't see any women still. There were students that went in that direction. There were students who went in the direction of, yeah, okay, we don't see women, but, is there a way in which women still find space without, like in a way that is maybe enabled by, let's say, their community or by their religion, which we may not be aware of, but it still happens, right? So the program brief thereby evolved from these conversations. So we decided that, okay, it has to have something to do with Islamic heritage, or that it has to have something to do with, let's say, cooperatives for women. I really enjoyed that particular semester because it evolved through conversation, and there were some really interesting design responses that came out at the end of it. So that this is what I meant, that interaction part is crucial. And not just between people, but even when you go to the place, you ask questions of the place, right? And they were incredibly amazed by the fact that nothing about these two buildings looked like anything they imagined as a mosque. And that's a beautiful thing about mosques in Kerala, that they look like they're buildings of Kerala. They don't look like any religion can claim them. It was nice to go to Sikkim and meet an architect who is a politician.
Interesting.
And somebody who is genuinely, who is one of the best architects of our time, Mr. Kailash Pradhan. And also to meet someone who genuinely wants to get involved in change making, because he feels like we just can't do enough as architects designing good buildings alone. Like, if one has to change things at a grassroots level, one has to get involved at a grassroots level. So we took our students there, we met him, and I think it blew their minds because he had nothing to say about what we can do in terms of design alone. He just asked a simple question, right? Like, how deep do you need to cut into the earth, really, to erect a building? And then sitting in that setting where he had his house in a bit of a valley-like situation.
Sorry.
Too loud.
Too loud.
Yeah. So, for starters, it's very interesting, one, to visit contexts where, you don't have any preconceived notions. Like, for example, when we decide where to go for a study tour, there's always this question of why are you taking them there, right? Of all the places you could go. Or are there enough modern buildings to see over here? Or if they're going to be designing an institution this semester, are there enough institutions over there? But one of the most challenging semesters is when they're going to design housing and you have to go somewhere for a study tour. Because, housing is all around us, right? So I think in those semesters, it's very interesting to decide where to go. I've done a couple of these, and both those times we picked context based on, can we go here and observe something interesting about how people live with the constraints that they have? So Sikkim sort of came about because of that. Not that we were going to intervene in a hilly region, because we don't have the expertise to do that. It's a whole other thing to work with slopes. But we still felt that it was important to go and see a city where the public life is great. Gangtok is amazingly safe, and you can be out on the streets till midnight. People are out there, and women, children, everybody is out there, which is rare, right? It's well lit, and usually we have a cutoff time for our kids to get back to the hotel by like 9 in the night. This time we were like, yeah, come back whenever, man. It's okay, right? It was good to go there and experience that. It was good to go and meet somebody who was like really challenging how our cities develop and, what our criteria for understanding development are. Like, he was talking about what a disaster it is for multi-story buildings to exist in Gangtok, because the earth over there is not built to handle that much load or weight. And he basically, one of his mandates, if he got elected, was to, sort of question the bylaws and the violations of bylaws that allow people to build uncontrollably. So it's very important to meet architects who get you to question, should you even be building in the first place? When I think about those sort of bright, sort of, light bulb moments that have happened so far while teaching, these are definitely some of those. Another fantastic experience was when we visited Calcutta. And again, even in Calcutta, it was, I think, a bit of a, like, again, a culture shock for the students, because we're so used to Mysore and it's, what do you say, the niceness of Mysore, that you go to a place where there are so many contradictions out there in the open, right? So, like for example, we went to Kumartuli, which is this large settlement of people who work with clay and pottery, right? Living right in the heart of the city, very close to the river banks. One of the things that we read before going there was, okay, that this could also, like, all of it intersects. It's like a commercial area. It's like a craft district, but at the same time, it's not a craft village. It's you're working with earth. What do you expect? There's things everywhere on the streets, right? So suddenly you're seeing that these are the people who are building the idols for Durga Puja and everything, right? And this whole idea of sacredness, right? But all of that, there's nothing remotely sacred about how the place feels. But then you start questioning, like, okay, am I getting something wrong in terms of what it means for, let's say, what is our attitude towards, this whole thing of cleanliness as, designers? Because look at our cultures, right? Is our attitude of towards cleanliness just a visual idea? Like everything needs to be clean on the surface, your roads need to be paved, etc., etc. But then they are working with earth that they are digging out of the riverbanks and they're building it there. And you're going to use these very idols to celebrate your biggest festival that everybody from the world is going to come to witness. So it was interesting for them to go there and see that and not know what to do with it. Because you cannot just say, I'm going to clean up Kumartuli and that's going to be my project, right? You realize that it is one of the things that's sustaining the city. We then went to Shanti Niketan, and It was interesting again to visit a university that a lot of people question the relevance of Shanti Niketan today, but it was nice to go there and see that that was a university that was built by people, again, with different ideas, but maybe one common sort of a goal. All the artists who worked over there back in the early, 20th century, they have all contributed some kind of a very unique expression or a very unique building. So it's not built like a campus, but it's more like something that mushroomed somewhere on the edge of the forest and farmlands, right? So I feel like, I've had quite a few of these moments of realization while teaching and traveling. And while traveling, you are no longer, again, standing and teaching, right? You're not professing. So it's interesting to have these encounters together where I'm as clueless as you are. So
nice. Yeah. So I love how architects see cities or see place. What runs in your mind when you go to a place, explore a new place which you haven't been there before?
So the way I see it, there are some parts of the process that need to be structured and some that have to be left unstructured because it is that bit that usually gives life to the structured bit, right? There are, again, different approaches to this. So for starters, for example, when we decide to go somewhere, we usually have set a mandate as to we are doing this semester and thereby we are going here. Okay, so it has to be, in some sense, already appropriate enough for us to. But the other thing is that it is always very complex and there are always too many layers. And for someone very young and who's also doing it as an academic requirement, it can be very overwhelming. So we do have to, in that sense, somewhere boil it down to simpler facets, right? Like, observe everything that you have got, but then maybe we can try and find patterns in those observations, right? So when we go to a place, it depends. Like, for example, if we are doing, let's say, in your third semester, the mandate of the studio is to try and understand how semi-urban or a rural context works. The rules are very different from what it is in a city, right? But there is a fifth semester where we are going to look at how public space in cities work. in tier 2 cities, right? Smaller cities. So public life in tier 2 cities is very different from, let's say, public life in metro cities, right? But by the time you get to the 8th semester, you're actually dealing with a large city, a metro city, right? And you've been asked to think about, does your building contribute anything other than just being itself to this city, right? Like, does it in any way add to what the city is about, its larger culture? Does it ease up any issues that might exist? The process of observation thereby gets somewhere tuned by those first set of questions that you ask, right? One thing that I heard in the master class, and this was a lecture that Soumitra Ghosh conducted for us for the public architecture semester. He was talking about how the most successful public buildings have the smallest details that a person can engage with 1:1. Like, one is, of course, the image of the building itself and, you know, your immediate visual impression when you look at it for the first time. But when you're in very dense contexts where, let's say, there's a lot of traffic on the roads and pedestrians are secondary, tertiary even, your experience doesn't come from a distance where you look at the building. At one point, cities used to be designed like that, but I wouldn't say that's the case now, not everywhere at least. So your experience is happening at the street level. Your building has to engage with someone at the street level. So when you suddenly have a little detail which makes someone feel like, maybe I can pause over here and take rest and look around, or, you know, a sudden shade that emerges along a stretch which was completely barren up until then. So he spoke about how it's a detail that makes a good public building, which I found incredible.
Do you have an excellent example for that? That's a nice idea.
I came across while during my master's, right? So in our foundation studio, we were, again, released into the middle of Ahmedabad, old city, right? And they were like, go find what you like and come back. That was the only thing that was given to us. And what I came back with was, I found a very interesting irony over there. Like, in one particular area, it was residential. And old residential, right? Like buildings that, residences that have probably existed for the past century or more. And a lot of very interesting essential public services. Like, you know, there was a general post office, the largest one in that part of the city. There was a school, a higher secondary school. There was an orphanage that was being operated by the Waqf committee over there and all of that. And I found it very intriguing that all of these public buildings were compounded, right? They had these tall compound walls with big gates and lawn space on the inside, not on the outside. And what really struck me then was, in front of the general post office, there was this row of philatelists, right? People who, old men mostly, who were just selling their stamp collections. And they were all sitting on the pavement, while against the wall, just behind the wall, you have about 6 to 8 meters of space that is just sitting there. Nobody's using it. It's just a dry lawn that nobody's using. And all of the institutions were like this. So-called public institutions were like this, completely walled off, doing their own thing behind that wall. But all of the residences had their steps open to the road. There were steps and there were platforms, steps and verandas. I am a complete stranger. I'm dying in the heat. I can go sit on those steps. I can go sit on that veranda. Nobody's going to chase me away.
Wow.
And I found it incredible that residential buildings, old residential buildings, are enabling this, while our public buildings are just sort of leaving us out on the streets. So that detail where you extend your building to the street, you extend your shelter to the street, I think that's an incredible detail. And that is something that any building can do, irrespective of whether it's a house or, you know,
right,
a school or anything.
So did you take photographs of that?
Yeah, I did.
Nice,
So I built my whole project around that, because we were asked to go find something that intrigued us and come back.
Tell me about Gangtok. What is it like?
Yeah.
And every layer of Gangtok. Like the moment I heard Gangtok, like I felt like I need to know this place. Like, you know.
One thing is, it is very difficult to draw a plan of Gangtok. You have to cut through Gangtok, right? Because obviously because it's built on extremely sort of, what do you say? The slopes are crazy, right? So your city is operating on levels, and the incredible thing over there is that there are all these interconnections that you would never even, see. This sudden, like set of steps will just emerge. You turn a corner and suddenly you're going down a series of steps. And the first 2 days were quite disorienting because you didn't know where you were started and where you were ending. But then you realize that each of the buildings are also pathways from one level to the next.
Wow.
Right? And they're commercial buildings. There's no concept of a mall as such, but all of their buildings that are any kind of public access are basically pathways from one level to the next. Like you can just move through a bazaar to get from this street to the next rather than to shop or anything like that, which I found very fascinating. And I guess most hilly terrains might do something like that, because I have found something similar even in Darjeeling. But the difference between Darjeeling and Gangtok is that Gangtok is way more dense. There are way more people. They have incredible markets. I didn't know there was so much prevalence of Korean culture in Gangtok, which was...
Is it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Which was a big sort of a revelation that people over there are very into the food, the music, and just whatever is contemporary Korean culture is big over there. And it was also, again, interesting to know that the urban populace of Gangtok is comprised of people whose roots are very tribal. So it's very interesting to have a lot of our preconceptions challenged when you meet people who have strong pride regarding the tribe that they're from. And these are people who, again, have very strong associations with their land. They treat their land as something that is very holy. But then you have this other end, which is the bureaucratic spectrum, which is, again, pushing that very flat logic of development onto a very hilly place, quite literally, right? So Gangtok, in that sense, was, and for me personally, the biggest what I will always like about that place is how safe I felt over there, which was rare.
What in the place that made you feel safe?
That you could just move around as yourself with nobody, sort of being weird or, you're just one body among so many bodies over there, and everybody is doing, they're just out there enjoying sitting on the street.
So people didn't find outsiders curious?
No, that's what. It was very nice to have that experience, very liberating. It was nice to feel confident that you could let all of your students, all your girls, usually you would say, hey, don't just move around in, solitary, go in larger groups. But after, we did give those advisories, but then after the first day in the city, we were like, okay, this is something that is rare for all of us, so, just enjoy it, right? But yeah, the main thing was how they had taken their central street. So, I mean, like every other city in India, big city in India, or other important city in India, that also has an MG road. And that is one MG road that was completely pedestrianized. And I was shook by that. Thank you for giving so much space to pedestrians, right?
Nice.
Like, I'm not running around worrying about parking. The good spaces on my street are not getting taken up by parking. But clearly provisions have been made for it. They have their challenges. It's not perfect like anywhere else. So you would say
it's a well-designed city?
I don't know about well-designed. I don't know if I know enough to say that it's well-designed, but there are some things that are definitely right about the place. You realize suddenly that all of these political boundaries are one thing, but how the place actually operates is a whole other thing, right? A lot of, there's a very strong Nepali presence over there, and you don't just see them as Nepali, but they belong to that place, right? And you're looking at it more as a geographical region than as, political boundaries, right? We went up to Nathula Pass. Everybody wanted to see what the Indo-China border looked like.
Wow.
Witnessed some terrible behavior from Indian tourists, but it was crazy to go all the way there. And then you realized suddenly that we have incredible weather over here, and hence we take a lot of things for granted.
True. I mean, traveling places, exploring places
Yeah.
must be the most fun part of the curriculum or
Yeah.
most interesting.
Yeah.
Is that what students love the most in what they learn in architecture?
So, for example, I've heard from a few students that they asked, friends or seniors from their school who have done architecture, like, what do you do in the course? And one of the things that the seniors always say is we travel a lot. Right. And a lot of people fall for that and decide to come for the course because they're
for
like,
traveling
we get an
experience.
opportunity to do that. You, in fact, do. Like, in a year, you're traveling at least to 2 to 3 different new places. And again, those 2 to 3 different places, it could be right next to you. It could be in the next state. Sometimes we try to, at least visit neighboring countries. There's one group that has gone to Nepal. There's one group that's gone to Sri Lanka. So I think travel is definitely one of the motivations for a lot of people who decide to join this course.
Right.
I don't know any other course that lets you do that, really. Yeah. A lot of people, for example, decide that they want to do a thesis in their hometown or not even, where they live right now, but where their actual roots are at, right? So a lot of people go back there. There are many people who, like I travel for my thesis. There are many people who travel just to do the case studies for their thesis. So it becomes a part, like by the time you're done with 5 years, you have at least been to, 3 study tours, 5 other context-based tours for your studio.
Right.
You have at least been to 10 to 12 places that you've never seen before.
And see places differently each time. Which are the places are you going to visit this year?
So we are, one group just came back from Jaipur and Ahmedabad.
Wow.
And we are going to Madhya Pradesh in February.
Which place?
So we're going to Bhopal and Indore as the 2 main cities, but then we're going to all of the sort of historic sites that are in the vicinity of these cities. Ideally, MP should have been like a 20-day tour or something, but obviously we don't have the time to do that in the semester. So we're going to be visiting Sanchi, Vidisha, Mandu, which I'm very excited about.
What is about Mandu?
So Mandu is your perfect fusion of a certain period of historic architecture where it's also a moment in history where there is a lot of interaction between Islam and Hinduism. So the structures over there are again beautiful structures that were built by Islamic rulers, but with very heavy Indic, qualities. So I have only read about Mandu and I've seen obviously plenty of pictures, and I'm very, very excited about going there.
Which time period are we talking about?
So we're talking 14th century.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they were contextual when they were building structures.
Yes. Interestingly, a lot of structures to do with water management that are also incredibly beautiful. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And we're also going to be going to this place called Maheshwar, which is another city on the edge of a river, and the ghats play an important role in the sort of socio-cultural, life of that place. And also like Bhopal and Indore both are important cities from the perspective of developments in post-independence Indian architecture. So some of the people that we consider the modernist greats have, designed important institutions over there, like right from Charles Correa's Legislative Assembly to an institute for forest management, and a housing project that we keep talking about that was an interesting model for social housing back then, done by B.V. Doshi, where he realized that when you're doing mass housing, you just cannot impose your visions on people. But what you can do is provide them a module which they can grow as their means improve.
Incremental approach.
Yeah. Obviously, there are, contradicting opinions even on this, where some feel it was successful, some question. I don't think anything is fully successful. Everything is continuous work in progress. But as a I think model, it was definitely interesting. So we're going to be going there, seeing that.
think by now you have explored all of India, Northeast, and like what are the places that are yet to be explored?
Oh, so much. I mean,
Even after 8 years of continuous planning, continuous traveling, and
yeah, because I feel like there's so much to see in Karnataka alone.
right. They literally, that tagline, no, one state, many worlds.
Yeah.
That is literally true.
Yeah.
The North Karnataka is completely different experience. Coastal is different.
Yes.
Southern is different. Like we have so much diversity that I don't think any of the state has such diversity in people, food, culture, the way they build.
Yeah.
Amazing. Like this is a country of its own, right?
Absolutely. And I think I would be very happy to do a tour of Karnataka from length to breadth, tip to tip. I feel like there's so much to see.
Yeah.
I absolutely haven't visited, for example, the whole northern section.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's that whole, sort of belt of Bijapur, Bidar, Golconda, etc. that I would like to sort of go to. Hampi itself was like a very recent, after all these years in Mysore, I went to Hampi only I think 2 years ago, and my mind was blown.
You should visit Badami.
Yeah. There's all of Karnataka. I feel like just looking at our neighboring states itself, there's so much to see.
Right.
I still I haven't been to Andhra Pradesh or Telangana, and even in Tamil Nadu, there's so much to explore, but we've just seen, some bits. So I'm hoping that, there's so much to see. Like even in Maharashtra, like you name me one state that you would not visit, given a chance. So but yeah, it's some of these are typical, for example, at one point of time, Chandigarh was like a pilgrimage spot for all architects, right? Every batch of every college would make that one trip to Chandigarh. But I feel like we've gotten to a point where we get to even have that conversation of, do I want to go to Chandigarh or not? Because again, Chandigarh is one of those things that is endlessly debated, right? Like, was it done right or was it done wrong?
Right.
But it's good to know that now it's not mandatory anymore. You can decide to go to places other than Chandigarh.
Now let's get into curriculum.
Yes.
So now I want to go through what students go through from the first semester to the end. What do they learn? What do they struggle with? What do they make? So I want to visualize that whole process from beginning to end, and when they walk out as a fresh graduate. When they enroll, when they come to the first semester, what shocks them the most?
Maybe the complete absence of textbooks. There are no textbooks and there are no straightforward answers. But there's always plenty of critiquing. You turn in a submission and then you think you might have done the best thing in the world, and then it comes back with no, this is not what we're asking for. So I think for a first year student, maybe the biggest challenge is knowing what to do with all the space that has suddenly been given to you to think. Right? That is one end of it. The other end is that you suddenly start to realize that things need to be very specific. That you have come into a course where you needn't be a good artist to succeed. A lot of people, so for example, a lot of conversations that I have with prospecting parents, social networks, this, that, etc. is, oh, my, child sketches really well, they draw really well, can they do architecture? And it's been at least 10 years that I've been, more than that I've been telling people, no. If they're good at drawing, don't just send them to architecture. Send them if they're genuinely interested in learning something about design and buildings, but not if they're good at drawing. They might succeed better in art school if they're good at drawing. Because here we draw for a reason. We draw to, there are different reasons why you draw, but one of the most, the whole thing is that we use drawing to communicate, right? So I think for just learning those rules of drawing to communicate is itself like, a huge learning curve. And you spend, let's say, the first 2 years of your course just learning how to draw.
Wow.
From scratch, right? learning how to hold a pencil and learning that this thing that you're trying to design, it has got so much dimension to it that if you slice it 5 centimeters apart from each other, you are getting a different set of information. The most interesting bit for me, the way I look at it as someone, just looking at what the course does, is you learn about drawing in different subjects. Your construction studio teaches you drawing a certain way. Your architectural design studio teaches you drawing a certain way. Your basic design studio teaches you drawing a certain way. Then we have a whole subject on just architectural graphics and representation, which introduces you to drawing a certain way. By the time you do all of this and, and at this point, you're still doing it all by hand. And by the time you get to, if you're just talking about drawing, which is definitely one of the biggest facets of the course, that when we talk about drawing, we say, how do you read this drawing? We don't say, how are you looking at this drawing? Like there's that very intentional use of the word read, which says that you have to pay attention, you have to go through the lines, and every line means something, every thickness means something. So that itself is a long, process to get to a point where a student can understand what does this line represent. It's still abstract, but it means something. So that happens a lot in the first 2 years, where we teach you, we try to teach what drawings can do, right? And it can be, again, there is a whole other thing where we teach all the rules, and then there has to be a zone where you don't follow any of those rules and you draw to find out. Right? For example, when you look at the notebooks of some of the, so-called great architects in the world, it's interesting that they have, for example, there's this architect, Stephen Hall, who has catalogued every single notebook that he has ever maintained for the last many decades of his life. His office just has stacks of his notebooks. He gets up in the morning and he just draws something that he thought about. And you never know where that drawing is finally going to come out.
Wow.
I feel like drawing is one big part of it. But then we start layering it on, right? Like, because...
what is about drawing with hand? Like people now with the computerized world, you can prompt, like students can, command a computer. You put the variables and requirement, computer can generate drawing. And even it can guide you how to look through that drawing. So is there a beauty in drawing by hand? What goes into students' head when they draw things? Is it a necessity now in this world to draw by hand?
In terms of, if you're just looking at it as, pure operations and a service that you're offering, with very little thought put into it, you don't need to draw by hand. But the value of drawing by hand is I feel like there is a certain one is, of course, there's a certain freeness, which you cannot access if you're going to, let's say, begin your process on an AutoCAD screen. Okay. Like, if I just want to make a squiggle, I just want to, let's say, for example, understand how a roof is going to sit on top of a slope. By the time I go onto AutoCAD, do I have the tools to do it? Yes, you can draw curves. You can draw the straightest lines that a hand cannot draw using this software. But you have immediately sort of, I feel like your starting point itself is detached the moment you do that. Like you lose rawness, you lose touch with reality the moment you enter that space, which is also why we still encourage, no matter how higher of a semester you go into, we still encourage that let your finding process be, let that still have these methods, right? And drawing with pencil is just one part of it. There is a whole spectrum of mediums, right? For example, what charcoal can reveal to you is not something that a pencil can necessarily reveal to you.
So you guys draw with charcoals as well?
Yeah, so we introduced them to a lot of mediums in the first year.
Why?
So I'm still thinking about answers to all of this, but it's like this, right? For example, if we look at the history of art across the world, across time, you do wonder about why certain people preferred certain mediums for the kind of work that they were doing. One is, of course, let's say it was a prevalent thing. Maybe it might have started off as a trend and then it continued, and everybody kept doing it for a while until the next person came up with something else. That is one way of looking at it. The other would be that there are some things that a medium would allow you to do that another one would not allow you to do. For example, when you work with watercolor, the water is the medium, right? You are controlling the image that you're producing, and you have very little control if you actually think about it. The water does a lot.
Right.
And to create a beautiful watercolor painting, you actually need to do very little. You just need to use water, and you need to know how you want to spread your colors. The water does the rest. But then the next layer of interest comes in when you realize that there are people who used watercolor in a dry way as well, where they don't use a lot of water, but they use more of the paint itself and do a sort of a dry on dry kind of a technique, right? So I feel like, for example, when you go to a landscape and you say, how would you like to represent this landscape? It's interesting that when you draw it with pencil, when you use watercolor, or you decide to do it with charcoal, you will find that you are observing different things about the landscape just based on that thing that you're using.
Right? Wow. Okay.
Because charcoal, and we also say don't use charcoal pencils, but use charcoal sticks, because it's fat, it's thick, you have lesser control. You cannot make fine lines. So when you cannot make fine lines, you will capture larger aspects.
Wow.
You will capture how something works with the earth, or you will think about volumes, and you will think about light and shadow, because you now have something that lets you do that. Whereas if you were doing the same thing with a pencil, you would actually have to sit and score 25,000 times to create that same effect, right?
So medium do influence how you look at things.
Yeah. So first year is about introducing you to all the ingredients that are available to you. You know, we talk, for example, when we're talking about a space, we sort of try to get them to look at it as, what is the floor doing? What is the wall doing? What is the ceiling doing? Right? So you break it up first and look at each of it independently. Then you come back and try to put it together. And then you start thinking about, okay, if I want to create a step variation over here, why am I doing it? Right? And so first year is a year for asking fundamental questions. Sometimes it can feel a bit existential, because students, you do see a lot of them going into, do we really need to think about it so much? But the point is that it's put out there. And then you engage with it as much as you want.
There's no end for it. Yeah.
So in first year, we basically sort of dismantle a lot of textbook learning based approach. Because honestly, there is no textbook, but there are enough number of books. It'll be like, okay, is there a reference? We'll be like, it's there in the library.
So you
go
pick
check it
what
out.
ticks you.
Yeah. But we also do introduce some, fundamental concepts and ideas. And I wouldn't again call them textbooks, but there are some books that are almost, biblical for
timeless,
the kind of, value or whatever that they add.
Ground them with the fundamentals and let them explore what they find interesting or useful.
Yeah.
Drawing is a major part they're exposed to in the first few years, first and second year.
Yeah.
So by the third year, you would say they have reliable drawing methods.
Yeah, because the thing is that what you're finally going to do with the computer, the kind of, sort of, let's say, the basic drawing conventions that you follow are the same as what you're doing when you're drawing by hand.
Right.
It's just that, again, the medium has changed. The feeling of the drawing changes. Like, you look at this and you look at the same thing drafted. But now, of course, you can always prompt it and say, make it look like it has been sketched. But you will still know that it has been made to look like it has been sketched. Right. It has become just an aesthetic now and not, something that emerged.
That is hand-drawn.
Yeah, all of this is hand-drawn.
My God, okay.
Yeah.
Damn. Like, what makes a drawing great?
Okay, this is like, again, subjective, super
Yeah,
subjective.
okay.
But for me, what makes a drawing great is I need to be able to linger with this drawing. There has to be some quality to it that makes me want to spend some time with it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, some, like let's say a drawing in itself, there are different qualities in that drawing, right? Like if you go through it layer by layer, and I'm not just talking about architectural drawings, I'm just talking about, like, it could be the drawing of even a doorknob. But if there is sufficient detail there or a certain quality over there that makes you want to spend time with it, that for me is a good drawing. For someone looking at it, they feel like, I'm not just going to flip the page now, I want to look at this for some time. That I know that I have not answered the question in any great way, but I feel like that's a great drawing for me. Yeah.
So it takes a lot of time to master drawing. I mean, do you think some people are gifted?
So for starters, let's say if we were just to talk about these drawings, they are not all made by one person. This is like, let's say, the effort of many people. Somebody would have done the outline, someone else would have done the inking, and this is when people realize what their skills are. Some people realize that they are very good at very quickly laying out the whole thing. A quick outline that everybody can then build on. Some people realize that they're very gifted in terms of
Details.
control. Like there's enough control over how they can use something with ink. Now, the moment ink comes in as a medium, you're again thinking about... So I think one fascinating thing that happened to me, and it has remained constant forever, is you're introduced to the whole wide world of stationery that exists in the world when you're an architecture student. And it becomes an obsession that sticks with you even as a professional. We are those people who will go to the greatest stores in the world, and we will still look for that one store where we can go and find paper and a kind of a pen. And you realize that, okay, why am I using a 0.1 pen over here versus a 1.0 pen, right? You're suddenly thinking about thickness. You're suddenly thinking about ink flows. You're suddenly thinking about, okay, do I want this to be like pre-filled for me, or do I want to fill the ink into this? Is there more control over the process? It all sounds obsessive, but when you work on it, you realize that it means something. For me personally, for example, one of the things has always been, I wonder, the things that we're obsessing about, is it something that only we obsess about? Most often than not, the answer is yes. Only you obsess about this, but it can't be true, right? Because otherwise, why would there be all of this work in the world that is constantly fascinating people? Right? So
stationery. Coming back to stationery, what's your favorite personal favorite stationery?
Hands down, Muji.
Okay, what about Muji that makes
Muji is this Japanese company, and I feel like Muji knows how to make something technically precise, no nonsense. They know what is the right weight for something for you to hold.
Wow.
Over long durations, and they have got so many variations. So that's what it's clean, no nonsense, perfectly ergonomic stationery. Their pens, their books, everything. They make everything. They even make clothes. They make like household appliances.
I will look into it.
Yeah. So I really like Muji, and Stedler, of course, is like a standard. It's. I was introduced to watercolor pencils because of Stedler. And
watercolor pencils?
Yeah, that in itself was like a great discovery. It's like you use them like color pencils, but then because of the nature of the pigment that is used, you can actually add water over it to blend it better.
Wow. And any favorite store in Bangalore, Mysore?
So we have a reliable guy who's been around since we were students, and he incidentally is also one of the parents in our school. Like his son studied with us. Okay. So we get basically a lot of our stationery from there. But I ask anyone who's traveling to bring me something back if there's a Muji in that country. or
I'm planning to travel to Japan this April.
Yes.
I'll look for.
Yeah.
Now that you told me,
Yeah.
I'll keep that in my bucket list.
Yes.
To visit Muji store and.
Yeah.
Okay.
The
Nice.
stationery store at CEPT is legendary. People who ever, like, for example, there are this is very specific shade of yellow tracing sheets that you get over there. And everybody will say, hey, can you please bring those tracing sheets back for me? I don't know, again, if it is pretension or what, but I do think that the yellow tracing sheet helps you see your own drawing better. There's something about it. So that would be like one chunk of things.
Yeah.
That is a big part. Because, by the time you get to the higher semesters, you're introduced to the softwares. And the way I see it, it doesn't have to, I don't see it as a loss of some value that comes in when you're working by hand, but it is inevitable. It is necessary because it helps you work faster when you're working with software. Because a lot of things that we work with are replicable. A lot of the details we work with are replicable. So one thing that I think, I don't know how many people think about this enough, but there is a certain discipline and hygiene associated with drawing. Okay? Like you need to set up your sheet. You need to set up your line weights. You need to ensure that your template is reliable. And if you set a good template now, for all you know, you can use it throughout your professional life. Right? You create a different template for different types of drawings. And that usually simplifies things a lot more. Where you are not doing the same thing again and again, but you have a very clear system for how your drawings are made and organized. And the best offices function like that. And if as a student you can crack that, I think nothing like it. So by the time they're in their 7th semester, they're doing working drawings, which is the construction drawings that are necessary to get a building up, right? So there you again break your building down into its constituent parts. All the romance of design is set aside for a bit, and it becomes about how thick are these members, how much, how does this sliding shutter exactly work? How many of these are you going to have in your building? How do the electricals work? How does the plumbing work? What specification do you need to provide the fabricator to get this gate made? Right? So you get down into the literal nuts and bolts
Mechanism
of it.
of action.
Yeah. And the working drawing stage is also usually where a lot of refining happens even in the design. Like if you're simultaneously working on both, you realize what is practical and what's not, and what is available to you as a resource and what's not.
It makes you rethink again.
Yeah.
So software. So is it introduced in the first year itself, or are they eventually?
Curriculum-wise, it is not introduced, but out of own interest, if they want to, they're never stopped. But as typically, it is introduced around your 4th semester.
Okay.
Right? So we begin with AutoCAD, then parallel 3D visualization software like SketchUp, and then along with 3D visualization, there's a rendering.
So walk me through the software, different softwares, and what each software is for. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's the whole Autodesk suite, right? So like the very basic is AutoCAD, but AutoCAD is also the most versatile. You can run an entire practice using just AutoCAD. But obviously, there's a lot more. But I know a vast majority of people who swear by AutoCAD and will always, no matter what new comes in, there will always be that bit. Because it just lets you make good, beautiful, clean drawings and have a good, sort of an organization system. Then typically the most commonly used is SketchUp, because you can transfer drawings from one to the other. You make a plan over here, you take it to SketchUp, you get to pull it up and extrude it.
So SketchUp is like 3D visualization of a plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of students, in fact, I have noticed, begin their process in SketchUp, where sometimes you're able to visualize the whole thing even before you know what the insides will work like.
Wow.
So there are a lot of people who model on SketchUp first and then bring it to AutoCAD and then refine it.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there are these plugins and extensions that you can add to SketchUp, where having made the 3D, now you want it to look a little bit more realistic as an image, right? So you render it, where you give it like realistic material textures. There are a lot of people who do incredible work on SketchUp,
Right.
where let's say you're doing super detailed, sort of interior projects where you have these high profile clients who want to know the ABC of what their space is going to look like. So you need to have a good sort of a team that can handle the rendering, and you can use those views to also sort of talk about the entire sort of, let's say, material specifications for that whole project. Of late, by not very recently, but BIM has been a big thing, right? Because BIM lets you integrate, quite literally, all the information that you need to build a building, right? And again, a lot of it can be standardized, put in place. So when you use softwares like Revit, for instance, it's like a integrated management system through drawings, right? And I am honestly not the best person to talk about the more higher end stuff like Rhino and all of that, but these are again softwares that allow you to really explore incredibly complex geometries, which possibly would be difficult to draw by hand, but the software being there even enables you to visualize something which you might not have been able to draw. And a lot of, again, practices across the world are using BIM a lot. There are very specific BIM courses that are offered, and there are offices that work only with BIM. So there's a growing market for that sort of a thing. Yeah.
So mastering each software itself is a career of its own, right?
Yeah, because that itself can be a career. If you don't want to be a designer, but you want to make drawings for others, you can have a you can have a package where you'll be like, I will give you like XYZ drawings, and I will give you XYZ number of views, and this is how much the whole thing costs for XYZ square feet.
Visualization as a service.
Yeah,
I've seen a lot of European studios who pursue this really, well-known studios. They just pursue visualization, nothing else.
Yeah.
And their collaboration is amazing. That they have a lot of talented people from different fields and coming together to, render, visualize.
Yeah.
Amazing plans. We are getting into computational world. I think possibilities are endless in this aspect, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure. It's a great thing, I feel, for example, to have this option where you can get your, let's say, model CNC cut, right? You need AutoCAD to do that. You need a good drawing, which you can then sort of take to your 3D printer that will follow the exact specifications in those drawings.
Product design. Right. Very versatile tool.
Yeah. Like, for example, we recently did a workshop where, I won't talk about the whole exercise, but it was fascinating on the whole, where it started with looking at a painting, interpreting it, and then coming to a sort of a three-dimensional form. And here the mandate was to introduce them to working with real-world materials, right? So you're working with concrete, but on a smaller scale, which is important to understand how the material even behaves. So, for example, have you factored in, let's say, how much you need to reinforce a form? So you can have as much of a crazy idea as you like. And then the moment you bring in material constraints, you have to modify that idea. So, for example, we gave them this blank, sort of a condition that you will use only concrete, plywood, and jute to make these sculptures. But that whole process of, and this was conducted by one of our alumni, his name is Anivrata, and he's the only person who I know of who was interested in concrete as a student, made concrete models as a student, and continues to make them even now, is now sort of, delving into, for example, how do you bring in the whole, sort of 3D printing aspect to how you make the form work for your concrete, right? So it was interesting to, again, one thing that we do a lot, we do it more successfully in first year, because in first year we're still in this thing of let us introduce you to things. After, I would say, second year, it has to become a lot more self-driven. We hope that we have put in enough,
interest in them.
thrown in enough points of curiosity for you to now pick up and run with it a little.
A material.
Yeah.
Drawing, software, and material, dealing with materials.
Yes.
Material would introduce you to the real world constraint.
Yeah.
So, what are the materials the students have worked with?
Concrete is still, like, for example, we never had any interaction with concrete when we were students. That might be something that is an effect of the place and the space that we're given to experiment. But typically, and for that matter, even having a workshop in a college is not a default setting. I realized that from the kind of college I studied in, the kind of college I did my master's in, and the kind of institution I'm teaching in, we realized that a lot of facilities are not a given, and that it is a great, sort of privilege to have some of it. Typically, you're introduced to brick. It always begins with brick. Right? Just sort of holding a brick, familiarizing yourself with how much it weighs, what are its dimensions.
Nice.
And the moment you do that, you throw in, a spanner into the works by saying that not all bricks are dimensioned exactly the same. Bricks are also contextual. It changes from place to place. It changes from, there is a standardized so-called dimension, of course, but if you go to, let's say, again, the outskirts of a place, or you happen to visit a different context, you'll see that the manner in which they make bricks also changes. Like, the bricks can become flatter, they can be sun-baked rather than kiln-baked, all kinds of things can happen. So we begin with brick, we begin with stone, and then we move on to wood, which is, and wood is like a whole world in itself, right? So basic, let's say, joineries in wood, right? The most basic joineries which you can, for example, use without using any kind of metal intermediates, right? Where just the joinery can hold the form. So we start with those. And then I feel like it's like how there's this series on Netflix, right? Called Salt, Fat, Acid and Heat. It's by this chef called Samin Nosrat. A lot of cooking analogies come into how I teach architecture. So she says that, and this is her book and it's a series as well. It's called Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. And she says that any and all cooking and any and all cuisines in the world can be understood and mastered if you just understand how to use salt, fat, acid, and heat in your cooking.
Nice.
And I feel like that's the case even with how we think about materials and architecture.
So what is an architecture equivalent for that?
There are a lot of people who would say that light is the first material. That your first material is not even something that you can touch, but it is something that makes or breaks an architectural experience, right?
Light and shadow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if that is too vague, I would still say that if we just even know how to use brick, stone, cement, and wood properly, I still say that we are in a very good position. I mean, there's a whole wide world of materials that's opening up. People are going in every possible direction. Maybe you can add glass to the mix.
Even metal now.
Yeah.
Plastic 3D printing.
Yeah.
Earth 3D printing.
Yeah.
The technology is opening up a lot of possibilities.
Yes. But the point is that the majority of the buildings in the world that are still built, they are built for regular people who have access to this standard set of 4 or 5 things.
Right.
So if you know to work with that standard set of 4 or 5 things and create infinite variations from it, I still think you're in a good place, right?
Yeah. Dealing with material is also amazing to think about, even that brick.
Yeah.
Right, that variation in the brick.
Yeah.
In the stone, each place has the different stones.
Yeah. Yeah.
A laterite stone, that stone, this stone.
Yes.
Like.
Yes.
Do they also learn the limits of a material? Like.
Yes.
When you stretch that thing, it can hold this much pressure. The physical properties of material.
Yes.
Aesthetic is they would know anyways. But the physical properties of a material.
Yes.
Are they exposed to that in architecture?
Absolutely. So there's this course called Materials and Methods in Building Construction that runs all the way from your first semester to your 8th semester. And curriculum apart and everything, like besides what is mentioned in the syllabus, it just goes to show you that if it's a course that's running from 1st to 8th semester, it is like constantly reinforcing how important it is for you to be familiar with this, right? And from the 2nd semester onwards, it starts running in parallel with building structures. So in building structures is where you're, sort of bringing the math to your understanding. I struggled with building structures, okay? And it is a common condition in architecture school for people to be really bad at building structures. And that is also why we say that, look, it's a collaborative profession. You need to have a good structural engineer on board. You need to have a good civil engineer on board. If you can do it all, great, but most people cannot do it all. And I think it is also important to not be doing it all yourself, right? So they do in these subjects, for example, one of the methods of learning in a construction studio is through the failure mechanism or the failure model, right? Like you build a model and you keep loading it until it gets to that point of failure and, sort of collapses. And then you start asking, okay, now why did this happen? At what point did it start to weaken according to you, and why did that happen? So then you start thinking about distribution of loads. You start thinking about how do you sort of work with, let's say, the base of a building versus the proportion that its height must go to. What structural elements do you need to continue?
Right.
And what structural elements can be independent of the overall grid? All of those conversations come in these kind of studios, which then ideally should find their way into your design studio. Right.
Wow, this is very exciting topic. A lot of analytical thinking here, right?
Yeah.
So material, drawing, and software. What's next?
The next is history and society, right? Very, very important aspects. So history, society, climate, and this larger idea of landscape.
Why history is taught in architecture? Why can't students explore on their own?
Yes, good question. The way I studied history of architecture in undergrad, I would have never imagined that I would actually go on to specialize in it and to continue teaching it. That's how much I hated it.
Okay. Now you are advocate of it. Okay.
Yeah, I despised the subject because it was taught as facts and figures, for starters, that this building was built by this person in this particular year. These are its dimensions. It's this long, it's this tall. This is the material that has been used to build it. And this is where it is located. And please open up XYZ book, look at the sketch of it and make a copy of that sketch in your sketchbook, write an exam, get out. I hated it. Then I went to do my master's. And there was this interesting juncture, at least the format in which I did it. We had something called the foundation semester, which is where we were introduced to the different tracks that we can take. But it is supposed to be that semester where you decide if a track is for you or if more than one track is for you. Do you want to do a major? Do you want to do a minor? Do you want to do nothing, neither of these, but you want to do it all? So the whole purpose of the foundation semester was to think about, do we have inherent orientations within ourselves, right? And there was this fascinating subject called contemporary architectural historiography. It's a mouthful.
Okay, can you repeat that again?
Contemporary architectural historiography.
Okay.
So contemporary, of course, being it's of our time for us right now. Architectural is, of course, something to do with the built environment. And historiography was a term that was introduced to me, like the art and science of writing history itself, if you want to look at it that way. Like, why do we write histories a certain way? What do we decide to write about, and how do we write about it? Right? And the very first assignment that was given to us was write a history of your family. In architecture school, okay, in a place like CEPT, which is like, again, like, it's the holy grail of architectural education here. They made us write 3 pieces first, and then at the end of it, write one final piece. And we had to exchange what we wrote with our own peers and everything. So what that got us thinking about was everything that has been happening. If I just look at my family, as, a sort of a petri dish, right? And they said, go back a few generations, right? Go back at least 3 to 4 generations and look at the history of your family. And you realize that everything that has been unfolding in your life is a minuscule version of everything that is unfolding in the world.
Interesting.
There is a kind of macro to micro kind of a thing that is happening. Like, for example, one
you
thing...
mean that pattern matches to the micro
Yes,
to micro?
like in terms of, like, for example, if a war breaks out and your grandfather was 10 years old at the time, how is that going to have any effect on how you turn out as a person? Or what
The
your
whole
tendencies
generation.
turn out to be? Or the kind of professional work that you get into? Or the manner in which your family accumulates wealth or builds it, right? It was interesting, for example, to look at one side of the family and see that there was this moment where one person said that, no, we have 11 children, girls and boys, they will all receive the same quality of education. And you suddenly realize that that is a breaking, like a very crucial moment in your family's history, which I would have never thought about if I hadn't gone into this course, okay? I mean, I'm like, yeah, okay, there is family. I am connected to so many people. Big deal, that's how I was. But then this got me thinking. And then you suddenly realize that there is a simultaneous wave of social reforms that is taking place in the state. And that is possibly why my great-great-grandmother thought that way. Not because of anything, a sudden awakening. She saw that the people around her were casting away this idea of caste, this idea of what is pure, impure, this idea of who should be allowed to do what or not, right? Because it's very interesting to sort of look at, again, if I looked at my friend's family that maybe, grew up in a different state, or, sort of like their history is associated with a different state, they would have probably taken a while longer to get there, or they might have got there even earlier because of some other prior exposure that had happened. So what this contemporary architectural historiography got me to think about was the fact that one is that the histories of regular people are not to be disregarded. We have a way of writing very glorified histories of certain events and individuals where it's like those are important, sort of turning points. Yes, of course. But the manner in which that impacts regular life is actually what history is. What it lets you do, I feel, is to build a greater understanding of literally everything. If you ask me, what are you going to do? Practical application, what does it help to study this, and what are you going to do with it tomorrow? I have zero answers. But I can very confidently say that it lets me process things in a way that I wouldn't have been able to if I didn't have this tool, if I didn't have access to history. Why is it important for a student of architecture to learn history? I would say that we get very critical about it because of the manner in which the syllabi are written. The syllabus is written. Look, again, I don't know what prompts the people who are writing the syllabi. I hope that at some point of time I'll get to write a syllabus. But the thing is that I studied in an institution where the syllabus was written and given. I then studied in an institution where the people who were teaching felt that the syllabus has to be written this way. They're not affiliated to anybody. They're only affiliated to themselves. And now I'm teaching in a place where the syllabus is written and given to us. But then fortunately, there are people who have been through certain kind of experiences or educational system that lets them question that. And they are the ones teaching this, right? So I might be teaching Indo-Islamic history. Right? I can make that whole course just about talking about Qutub Minar and Taj Mahal and call it a day and move on. But I would use it as an opportunity, for example, to talk about when and why did this first arrive here? Is it important to even think about why it first arrived here? Do you know of any narrative associated with this that has nothing to do with invasion and conflict, but something to do with trade and syncrecy, a kind of syncrety, right? And through this, once again, one of the first questions that I ask in this class is, because a lot of the architecture that we teach in history, unfortunately, or not, is to do with religious history and public buildings only. It's like no other buildings ever existed. Like wherever the regular people living, nobody knows. It's always the residential bit of any historic settlement that is usually most ignored, right? So first question that I'll ask is, what do you imagine a church looks like? Or what do you imagine a temple looks like? Or what do you imagine a mosque looks like? And then you have people throwing out words like domes, minarets, this, that, and the other. There are some people who believe that only mosques can have domes, right? And again, these are not just young people who come to study architecture, but people who you generally meet in life. And then suddenly you show them Mishkal Masjid in Calicut, which is the mosque I was talking about earlier. And you see that you suddenly have that moment of everything you ever believed being questioned, right? And you realize that all of these are notions that evolved because of, let's say, a certain kind of patronage, a certain kind of belief system. Like, for example, the idea that a dome is not just a dome, but a representation of the heaven above earth, right? And then you start getting into geometries. Like, for example, one of the abstract ideas that really broke my mind was, in a good way, was the fact that the square is associated with everything that is rooted, and the circle is associated with everything that is celestial and has no beginning and no end.
Wow, yeah. Right.
And a lot of geometries in our buildings, especially the older ones, you can take ancient temples, you can take ancient mosques, you can take ancient churches. It is all about transitioning from a geometry of a square to a geometry of a circle, which is where all the hexagons and octagons and everything come into play.
Wow.
That ends up becoming a structural feature. But you have a belief system which also tells you that you need to have a central congregational space. You have a belief system that tells you that I need to see this at the end of a journey versus I need to circumambulate and come back and then see this, right? So I feel like what teaching history lets you do is to appreciate these tendencies and patterns that have existed in humankind since forever. And that has not gone anywhere. One thing that I have always been intrigued by is that there are some topics that are rarely ever picked up in a design studio. You will say, you'll say, third semester, let's design an Anganwadi or a public health center, or, for fifth semester, let's do an art museum, or, let's say cultural center or something like that. Sixth semester, you're designing an institution. Seventh semester, it could be anything. You're either designing industrial or you're designing high-rise. Eighth, you're dealing with urban issues, right? When do you design A, a legislative assembly, or B, a religious building? People choose to do it in thesis, but it is one of those programs that is rarely ever introduced by a faculty as, "Bhai log, we are going to do a temple this semester." It is so difficult. Why is it so difficult though? Because we just keep talking about these things, right? So much of our documented history is about these kind of structures. Yeah. Public buildings and religious institutional buildings are the most documented. They have eternally had the greatest patronage. You have the best people, the people with the greatest access to resources who are backing these projects. But we don't pick it up in design studio. But people do pick it up in thesis if they're interested, because thesis is self-driven. It just gets me wondering why.
Yeah.
But it's an important question to ask, right? Like, if you look at temples that have been designed by contemporary architects in the present day, it's very, again, interesting to see what gets retained and what doesn't. there's a general idea of a form that is retained. There's a general idea of centrality that is retained, but possibly what is shed is the layers of sculptures and this and that. And it's very interesting. I think that in itself is an interesting, area of research, just to look at how have religious buildings been built in the past 2 decades, if
This
not.
is an interesting conversation. So what is being shed?
So again, there are 2 ends of it. There is the bit that goes into hyperdrive, like let's say where there are, okay, but this brings me back to the point of judgment, right? Like when do you decide that this is a good building and this is not a good building? Because there are plenty, because even today there is, this whole profession of, I'm forgetting the exact term, but they are basically temple architects. That's their job. They supposedly know all the shastras and whatnot that is required to design a temple or to decide the proper proportions of something. There are rituals associated with every part of it. They are also elaborately ornamented and carved and, provide a lot of employment to sculptors, and all of that is there. And then there's the other end, where, you have something very stoic and very stark that emerges. Like, for example, a temple of steps or something like that. It feels ancient, it feels futuristic, it feels like it belongs in the present, but it doesn't have any of the trimmings, it doesn't have any of the, let's say, pink dome, orange, sort of gilded gold archways. It doesn't have any of that. It's just like a very, very stark, sort of a form made of stone with no idols, no sculptures, nothing.
Profane.
Yeah, very profane, profound, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's there. And it's a space for people to go worship, right? I feel like how we represent our faiths and how we represent our legislature is something that is very challenging and very
to be
difficult.
Integrated into the curriculum.
Yeah, because you then really have to step away from the shoes of the architect, and you really have to think social. You have to think political. You have to think about, why does it have to be like this? I think that break starts happening around 5th semester, though. That's the crucial thing when you look at it as a trajectory in the learning process. I feel like 5th semester is suddenly where the fact that you're operating in the real world is made very, very apparent.
When is urban design, urban development, urban planning, anything to do with the large scale is introduced?
So all of that is introduced from your 3rd year onwards. So 3rd and 4th year largely dwelling on these larger ideas. So your urban design theory gets introduced as a theory subject, and then urban planning is introduced as a theory subject. And then in your 8th semester, you're doing a studio in an urban context. The thing is, even in the so-called urban design studio, we begin by acknowledging the limitation that we are not urban designers. Okay, and that we are architects operating in an urban context. So we do look at larger issues, but we make it very clear that you're not going to be solving any of these problems, because that is a much larger collaborative effort for which you, yes, truly need to specialize, and you truly need to work with a larger group of professionals. You have to work with ecologists, you have to work with planners, you have to work with everybody who's going to give your lofty ideal a reality check. I think the bit that really challenges students when they come to this particular semester is the sheer amount of group work that is required. Group work is usually required at different stages. We do group work even for documentation in 5th and 3rd semesters. But when you get to UD, you realize that there are so many layers, really, and it's very difficult. Like just understanding traffic is a thing in itself, or just understanding how drainage works is a thing in itself. And just understanding how people use space, and what mela happens, when understanding the cultural calendar of a city and how that transforms spaces in a city, that's a thing in itself. So I think what happens in 8th semester more than anything else is you realizing the sheer vastness of things that you need to consider if you have to build a building that is supposed to serve the whole city. The counter spectrum of that, which I find immensely fascinating, is that a lot of urban interventions can be very small scale, well designed things, right? Like if somebody asked you to redesign a traffic circle, what are you going to do? Or if somebody told you, just think about how you're allocating the edge of your property. Do you want to share it with the edge of the street? Do you want to help extend a pavement into your street? Do you want to provide space for vendors? Do you consider vendors a nuisance? Or, do you want to make your building so imposing that while you're here, this building is all that occupies your field of vision versus, the questions are endless, right? So I think we don't maybe deal with urban issues in their entire magnitude because honestly we are not equipped to. You need so much data to operate with that.
So what are we missing in the curriculum? We covered a lot.
There's a whole wide world of electives. That honestly
electives
for me,
is you choose what you like to. Okay.
Yeah. So there are electives that are offered by the university, and there's also this really nice system where you can write an elective and propose it to the university, right? You write the syllabus, you of course sort of plan for it a little bit, but
interesting.
You can write a syllabus and propose it, and for all if it's accepted, you run it as a new subject.
So can you list me some of the elective students have proposed?
So students don't propose the electives, though it would be great if they did. Whatever electives that have been proposed by us. So one elective that was... So I can talk about what we have as a typical set and then some of the fun things that have been added, right? So some of the electives that you have in your earlier years, there's product design, there is visual communication, which goes into that whole realm of graphic design, and then there is architectural photography. In architectural photography alone, there are like 3 kinds of things. There's one called filmmaking through still photography. The new
elective of its own.
Yeah, which was an elective that one of our faculty introduced, which I think was great because we are constantly taking photographs as architects and just as people on this planet in general. Everybody's taking pictures. So how do you, sort of use all those stills to make a movie? I think was a very fascinating elective. There's one on heritage documentation, and of late, heritage documentation has also been going in that direction of, integrating more tech, right? How do you sort of 3D scan structure,
right.
Like using LiDAR mapping techniques and things like that. So heritage documentation has been heading into very interesting realms. There is an elective on craft in architecture, which again has been interpreted differently by different teachers. Some teachers look at it as the crafts industries that, sort of bring life into architectural spaces. Some people look at it as the craft of making a building. Some people, again, look at it as, working with a material and then crafting a building using that particular material. So there's that. There's an elective on architectural writing and journalism, which I have been handling for the past many years. There is one on biomimicry, which is what can you learn from nature and like the structures that exist in nature.
Who's taking up that elective?
Shashank was teaching this for a very long time. He's now pursuing his master's his PhD in Canada.
On biomimicry?
No. Okay. He interestingly, but he's also someone who has his head in history, his feet in tech. He uses art to sort of connect all of it. So really fascinating practice called Holy Cow Studio. But yeah, he was handling the biomimicry elective. Then some of the, like I was saying, the electives that we have proposed, there's one that is called, readings on experiences in Indian cities. So there's this whole sort of realm of scholarship that is emerging, which says that Indian cities and by extension South Asian cities, we don't fit into the templates of Western cities. the same parameters that you use for development over there, the same metrics that you used over there,
Can't be applied here.
cannot be applied here. And you cannot consider one inferior or superior to the other. That the layers of complexities in our cities need to be understood for what they are. Which
they
in
see
itself,
chaos here.
Yes.
We see order in this chaos.
Yes. So I think that just to be able to dwell on that itself is an important thing. It's important to be able to talk to students about the fact that this is not complete disorder and chaos and madness just the way we are trained to, the images of so-called urban developments where you take a stretch of a river and you turn it into a riverfront, Everywhere you go and turn your edges of your rivers into riverfronts. What is that even doing to your rivers other than, and you're cleaning it up, you're making it a recreational space. Who's going to come and have recreation over here? People. Regular people, middle-class people who want to come and, just hang around, shoot the breeze, eat some snacks, throw the garbage over there and walk off. And somehow we consider that to be some kind of... But then, simple things like, so what happens in this particular course is they watch some movies, they read some books, and they read books by Indian authors. They read fiction by Indian authors. For example, you're reading R.K. Narayan, you're reading, Rohinton Mistry or somebody like that who has written about what it means to, sort of live in Mumbai, or what does it mean to grow up in some nondescript, little village in Tamil Nadu. Or you read a Perumal Murugan who has, sort of really questioned everything to do with class, caste and gender through his writing. But he tells you how spaces in your village and your homes become, these spaces where you start witnessing these phenomena, right? Or you watch a movie like The Lunchbox or, Salam Mumbai or something like that. And you're just thinking about what is it that make us our cities, right? So that is one elective.
So you mean you interpret from all literature collection and then imagine a picture of this city, how it functions, what is the city. Okay, because, just on the literature input.
I feel like because one of the premises of this course is also that film and other forms of media allow us to think about cities just as people, not necessarily as people who are always trying to intervene to solve a problem. But before you even intervene, you just need to take it in first. And these mediums allow that.
Nice.
Right?
Okay, that's one of the electives.
Yeah, that's one of the electives. There's one on postmodern perspectives because it's sort of an acknowledged fact that the whole modernist period in architectural history has, there's a major hangover from that. And there are people who will obviously, diss postmodernists for just being a response to modernism. But what the postmodernists did was, they just sort of looked at the modernists and said, no, all this is crap. We are going to be a little bit chaotic about this, but we will still question you. So just that act of questioning was important. What they did with it is subjective. You can hate it, you can like it, whatever. But I think it's, again, interesting that there's a course just to look at postmodern perspectives, right? There's a fascinating course called Architectural Atmospheres. One of the intentions is also to use AI prompts to generate quite literally architectural atmospheres. And then you're thinking about, okay, why am I, sort of constructing this prompt a certain way? For example, if somebody tells you this has to be a space for, some kind of spiritual repose, right? Then you are maybe using Midjourney or something like that to sort of figure out what kind of prompts do you want to give, what kind of light do you want to bring in, what according to you is a mystical space, and how are you and the machine sort of communicating to generate this image.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah. So I feel like the electives are also a wonderful zone really to encounter yourself. The best part is that the constraints of the regular courses do not exist in this. And it's also usually freed from the grading constraints. For starters, we grade it all internally. So I can bring my own rubric to this. If I decide I don't want to conduct 3 unit tests, I don't have to do it. If I say that you're evaluated purely based on participation and whether you're just contributing to the class through your thoughts. That's it. So it's a very freeing space. But besides this, there's also this system of annual workshops, right? Like, it used to be twice a year. Now we do it more. It's become more of a once a year offering where we bring in people from different fields to just offer a workshop for 3 days or 1 week or something. And we've had some fascinating workshops, right? So for that period, classes are suspended. Everybody has to part. And at a time, we offer like 13 to 14 workshops, right? From theater to dance. We've had different forms of dance. We've had different forms of theater. We have had different... one of the more interesting recent ones was one on sound engineering.
Wow.
Where they, again, actually had to work with sound, with the whole rig and everything. I don't know what any of it is called, but the stuff with, your synthesizers and everything. And they were doing some really fascinating stuff. There was one on filmmaking. There was one on fire-free cooking. There was one on spinning. And all they did was, sort of use sort of an advanced version of a charka to sort of spin.
So it takes 5 years, right, to finish
Yes.
finish the course.
Yeah.
So what is the difference you have seen first day of the student and the last day when student walks out as a graduate? How do they see world differently? Not just the buildings, but the overall perspective.
5 years is very formative, right? Like, it is life-changing in many ways. And one thing that I have typically noticed with students is that I'm not sure how much clarity they would have on professional goals because, for instance, I don't think this is one profession where the logic of placements after graduating really works. Because it's very important to discover your niche, and it is very important to also, having not discovered your niche, continue to explore until you get to, a spot where you feel that you are truly adding value, right? So what happens is, because it's not placement oriented, let's say you in the process of 5 years, you're trying to also figure out, and usually in that internship semester, you also try to, get to an office where you think they're doing the kind of work that interests you. And after you graduate, you have to continue with that process because there are all kinds of architectural practices and design practices in the world. And then there are people who discover that at the end of 5 years that this is not for them. There are many like that also. Maybe not very many, but considerable number. Right?
That must be painful, no? After spending 5 years and then getting to know it's not there.
I have a slightly different take on that, right? Like, in the sense that one thing that I have noticed is, because it's a course that brings you in contact with so many facets other than just what it takes to make a building, a lot of people either find a new interest that is equally as powerful, or they realize that something that they previously had and they want to continue growing in that direction. So typically, one thing that the course does is, because there are so many instances throughout the semester, throughout the year, where you have to, put your idea out there, defend it, talk about it, take criticism of that idea. And
articulate it.
Yeah, and then you need to process that critique. And then you need to decide what you want to do with it, right? And you do this at least thrice in a semester. So by the time you're done with your course, you have done it at least, like 25, 50, and then there are many people who, for instance, one thing that we encourage is talk to more and more people about what you're doing, right? Don't just listen to that one person who's your studio guide. Ideally, talk to more faculty. We have also tried to create an environment where it is easy to engage with people. Talk to your seniors, talk to your juniors, right? So a student who's really sort of into the whole process would have ideally had their work and thoughts reviewed by n number of people. So one good thing that is likely to happen is either A, you build an ego so massive that, you have to maybe spend the next few years learning to unlearn it. But the positive is that this idea of something supreme or you being like a very good designer, it gets a very good reality check. And there are different forums also that you present on. We bring different people to review your work. You're not always being reviewed by people who are inside the institution. You are always being reviewed by people who are active in the profession that we bring from other parts of the country and everything. So you are constantly exposed to perspectives. It is very important to go through that bad jury where, you might have had complete faith in what you were doing, and then along comes this one person who, shatters it, right? And I have noticed that is a big part of the learning curve in the architecture course, that this whole thing of how do you take feedback on the work that you have done? How does it affect you, and how do you move on from that? What do you do with that feedback? How do you process it in a useful way? Is a very important part of the course, and it's usually a very difficult thing also. A lot of people, get very affected by what happens in these juries. It's not easy to put up your work and talk to 4 or 5 strangers about what you have done. But if you actually think about it, these people know nothing about what you have done, so it should also be something that you can do freely. But maybe the setting can be a little bit intimidating, like you have 5 people just looking at your work and you're standing and they're sitting, and then there might be 50 others who have assembled to see what you have put up.
And you have to articulate that idea in such a way that all of them would get it.
Yes.
So articulation is also an important part.
Yeah. So imagine doing that n number of times. You can imagine what it could do for your confidence by the time you're out.
And taking critique is also an art.
Yes.
Not many would take it well.
Yes. Taking critique and offering critique, they're both an art. Because by the time you are in your 2nd, 3rd year, you are a senior, and then there are going to be people coming to you asking for your thoughts on something, right? So I think one thing that really, again, ends up, coming out, and we talk about this. We talk about the difference between critique and criticism, right? Like one is that a critique is a balanced perspective. It tells you what it is for what it is. It is not done with the intention to destroy, what you have done. And if it needs to be harsh, it needs to be harsh. So there's that objective quality to critique, that it's the job of a good critique is to try and push this outcome towards a better version of itself, right? But criticism, on the other hand, it can be very, you can think of it as something negative, as something that is, just pointing out all the flaws in what you have done. I think it's important to have that perspective towards critique.
How to be a good critic?
How to be a good critic? I don't know, one is, of course, it depends on the complexity of the project that they've been asked to deal with. And it also depends on, as a student the way you look at a student in the first year is different from what you would expect from a student in their thesis semester.
Expectations.
Right? So you already go in with that bit of where can I be kinder? Where can I be a little bit more critical? So, and it's also a balance of, have they done the work to support what they're saying, right? Is it sufficient? Have you explored enough? And having explored enough, have you represented it in a justifiable manner? So all of this comes in. Standard, people tend to make it a lot more about the quantity of work, which I don't deny is important. But I do think that it's important to show that you have spent enough time considering the complexities, right? It's good to have a reason for what you have done. Then it's easy to have a discussion. But to come back to your question of, is it painful to discover that this is not for you after 5 years of having done it? One thing that I have noticed is that the people who break away from the field are usually relieved that they have broken away from the field. It doesn't come with a lot of pain. It comes with a lot of relief that I did this for 5 years. I realized it's not for me, and thereby I'm doing this now, and I'm so glad that I took this decision. That happens quite often.
Feeling of relief.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the interesting thing is also that many of them get introduced to this thing that they want to do because of this as well. Like, for example, we have people who have gone into jewelry design. We have people who have gone into full-blown graphic design. We have people who, they go into the more design-allied fields. Then there are people who will be like, hey, I want to do an MBA after this. There will be that rare student who, completely shifts field. Like, for example, I had the senior who went and joined the Navy after doing architecture.
Wow.
I have another batchmate who has decided to go into full-time farming after doing architecture. So does it have anything to with having done the course? I'm not sure. But what the course equips you to do is to juggle multiple things. Whether you like it or not, you have to juggle multiple things. Today, you're going to be working on your jury submission, you're going to be working on organizing an event, and you're going to be working on maybe sending something to a competition. And possibly tomorrow, you'll have to go help a senior build their model. So there are a lot of things that you'll be constantly doing. And I feel like in that process, you do learn a lot about yourself. Like, for example, one of the things that I learned about myself in the process of having done undergrad, done masters, and having been teaching for a while is that I am definitely more research inclined than practice inclined. And the value that I can bring to, like, let's say a studio or even a project for that matter is the depth of research that I can bring into it. Because that takes a certain other kind of tenacity. You do have quite a few instances of students who, for example, they discover that they don't want to be part of an elitist practice that only designs for wealthy clients, but they want to be more socially engaged, that they want to be, either have their own practice where they have all kinds of clients or work with an organization that, works with, let's say, marginalized communities or something like that. And then there are, of course, people who will say, like, no, I won't be with an outright corporate because I like the systems and processes they have in place. It pays well and I want to do that. So it gives you sufficient exposure to make these decisions.
A freshly graduated student, can they take real-world residential project?
Yes. That's what the course preps you for. It preps you that you to be a professional at the end of these 5 years, like that you will have the basic ethics and knowledge that it takes to be somebody who can offer their professional services, right? Because soon after you do this, in India at least, you are eligible to apply for a Council of Architecture certificate. There are, of course, countries where having done the course, you would still have to write a qualifying exam and, go through XYZ hours of training and then write a very elaborate exam and maybe clear multiple papers until you are certified as a professional. Here, we don't have that. It's a boon and a blessing both.
So the moment you graduate from a school, you would get a practicing certificate that you are eligible to practice architecture, is it?
Yeah, you get registered with the Council of Architecture as an architect. And getting registered means that you are now in the position to sign off on official documents, which help you take a project forward.
I'm curious, like, how do exams look for architects? Like, we had all written exam, math solving. So how is exam for architects? Like,
exams in architecture, I think, are a misplaced entity, but unfortunately we have them. So for the design studios and all the studio subjects, So all the studio subjects, it is jury-based, right? Like you present your work or you have a viva or something where it is about your presence of mind in that moment and how well you put forward what you have done. So that system of evaluation, and that right now even that is being questioned. A lot of people are questioning whether the jury is even a desirable format of evaluation.
Is it objective and subjective? Like jury come up with its own bias, own form of way of looking at things,
and what it does again for the confidence of a student. The counter perspective to what I said, where it makes you more confident, is that it can really destroy your confidence also. It depends on how sensitive each individual is, how that jury might have gone We have heard horror stories of very, very, harsh juries, vindictive juries. Some of us have been in them ourselves. And you emerge at the end of it a certain way. But that format is also being questioned. And I think...
So what do they think of the alternative for this system, jury-based system?
I honestly don't know what it can be, because it's something that you'll have to find through experimenting, right? Like, for example, one thing that I have often thought about is, when we have juries, why is it that we only invite architects to be part of the juries? Because if I have designed a primary school for a village, shouldn't I have at least people who are going to be, possible clients for that or possible patrons for that as my jurors, right? Because ultimately, when you practice, you are designing not for other designers, but you're designing for people who live in that space. So I have often wondered, why don't we have professionals or residents? For example, if you're doing a housing, project, would you, for example, invite somebody from a residential association to evaluate your scheme? Or would you at least invite a builder, you know what I mean, who will at least look at it as pure numbers?
Maybe even one of the part in the evaluation, right?
Yeah.
You can train and model to look through the variables and give feedback objectively, without any bias, and we can fine-tune the model and replace the juries. I mean, alongside juries, there you can see the balance to you. What jury says, what the model says objectively, subjective and objective view as well.
Yeah.
Okay, I see that as an opportunity. I can do something there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now
that is one of the system, jury-based studio system.
So that is one form. The other is, yes, we do have exams.
Written exams.
Yes. So for all the theory subjects, we do have tedious 3-hour exam.
What do the questions look like for exams?
They're quite unimaginative.
Like
It's so the way that it happens because the somebody from the university is setting the paper, and the somebody could be anybody who's teaching at any affiliated college, right? The thing is that I realized that these exams are aimed at a bare minimum only. Like, the aim of the exam is to ensure that you're checking if the syllabus has been transmitted and they have received it. So they're very flat, very direct questions. If there are 5 modules in a syllabus, the question paper is also organized into modules. It says that these 2 questions are from module 1. So it's siloed, right? But that is not how
it is just to check the system, not the student.
No.
The exams are just to check the system where they have done their duty on transferring this.
Yes.
Not to evaluate the student.
Yeah. Again, during my master's, I was in a system where there were no exams, but there were exercises that you do to evaluate, and it's all internally evaluated. And then, yes, your faculty can invite other faculty to be part of this process based on their discretion, based on what the intent of the whole exercise was and all of that, which I have found massively, rewarding. It's like you can spend your entire semester writing one paper that you have put so much thought into, right? So much critical thought into. You have not spent that time trying to mug up something, half an hour before your exam. So I find a lot of merit in these internal evaluation systems. I feel like those mechanics, the institution is more in control of, especially if you're affiliated to a larger university. Like, you do that bit to, sort of keep everything smooth and whatnot. But internally, we can have very elaborate ways of looking at it. We can have very critical ways of looking at it. So you win some, you lose some, right? You do write an exam at the end of the day, but...
How did the architect or very popular architects perform in the exams, in the architecture school? Like, are they, is it necessarily they're the toppers in the...
No, not at all, because there are plenty of architects who didn't even go to architecture school, right? And I will tell you the name of this book. I mean, I will let you know, but it's by this Italian architect called Pierluigi Seriano, and he happened to come to know about this creativity test that was once administered by Harvard back in, I think, the 1950s or 1960s or something, where they set a test for the biggest architects of that time. And they all took it. And it was like I think some 40-hour situation where they all had to respond to simple prompts. Something as simple as how do you draw a line to something a lot more complex. And at the end of that, they had their own sort of mechanics to figure out what here truly is a measure of creativity. And then you tabulated all of that, and then you found out that, okay, Eero Saarinen is the most creative architect of his generation, and a Louis Kahn is somewhere in the vicinity but not quite there. And all of that, again, is very subjective, right? But it depended on how these, so many of them responded in that controlled condition of 40 hours. How did they respond, right? So I don't think the people who ended up being recognized as architects, at least not all of them were academic geniuses or anything. There might have been a few who succeeded better in college than others, but many of them didn't even go to architecture school.
So jury system and written exams and Viva.
Yeah.
So that's how you evaluate.
Yeah. And then some subjects are just purely evaluated internally, like things like electives and all. We just evaluate it internally. There's no need
just by the depth of their work.
Yeah.
So now I want to get into the institution's projects, like the projects. What are the projects institution is involved with? So I've seen some couple of Instagram posts where I was intrigued by this something called Onion
Project.
Onion Project.
Yeah.
So I want to see 3 projects institution is actively involved in or has taken part in, and what is that project and what its impact on the students or society or whatever. I mean, the intention of the project.
Wow, what's happening?
What's that?
We have always been keen on is this idea of yes, you are an institution, but recognizing that you're an institution within a context and within a city, right? So one is where we see ourselves as an institution in the city of Mysore, and the other is where we see ourselves as an institution that is part of the larger region of Karnataka, and the kind of resources that we possess over here. Is there any value that we can add in how we document some of these contexts and how we make this information available to other people, right? So with that in mind, like, for example, it could be something at a very sort of a direct, city connect cultural kind of a level where we offer our space, and the nature in which the space is also designed is so that we can host events, right? We can host exhibitions, we can host music festivals, we can host art and dance related, like anything, like any kind of a cultural, like for example, we did a thing called Dasarotsava where Dasara is big in Mysore. So our student council had this whole thing that they organized for the people of the city where, again, it's like cultural events and stalls and things like that. So that is one part of it. But the more sort of, let's say, interesting initiatives that have emerged just from this idea of, recognizing that you're part of a larger context is, one is, of course, the Onion Project is the most recent. So the Onion Project is an initiative by 2 of my colleagues, Siddharth Srivastava and Salila Vanka. And it began with this whole idea, again, of Indian cities and how do we understand Indian cities. And the fact that besides these typical forms of architectural representation where you go to a building, you draw it, you document it, you measure it, you write your, you make your sections and plans and whatnot, which is very exact. The fact that when we experience a city, we are constantly building maps in our heads, right? And that map is a very subjective version of the city, and that there are many ways in which people decide to map a city out for themselves. Someone might be purely looking at it, let's say, in terms of roads. Someone might remember landmarks. Somebody else might remember certain kinds of landmarks, right? Somebody else might just be, for example, interested in looking at where within a 5-kilometer radius do people go to have chai, right? And these are all, again, based on very lived experiences of regular people in a city. And Indian cities being as vibrant and complex as they are, there's no end to anything that you can map. So that's how the Onion project began, as a competition. It started out as a competition, but the way I look at it, the competition is just a way to begin the conversation, right? Because at the end of that competition, you have 80-odd maps that have been made by people from different age groups. Like, we have a student category and a professional category. So then you have people who have looked at cities in different ways. They have put together a representation of it. And as part of all of this, we also invite people from different fields, right? So last time, the first edition of the Onion Project was concluded with a symposium where our invited jury members were also speakers. And this included architects, it included city planners. There was one very interesting person who has been building an open source map for Goa where, citizens contribute to the map. There was a filmmaker. There was somebody who has written a fascinating book called Why Loiter, which is it's quite literally, the subheading of the book is Women and Risk on Mumbai Streets. So these are the kind of people who are called in. So they're basically perspectives on how we look at cities, how we process it, what are the issues associated with it. Not just issues, it is very much to do with just experience, right? So that's what the Onion Project started out as. And now the competition, because of, we had a lot of interest generated in the first edition, and now the second edition has come out, and, the call is out and all of that. But what they're also working on right now is, putting together a book of perspectives on how do we read Indian cities, right?
Nice.
And approaches towards that. So that is one of the sort of initiatives that we have. Another one is so all this that you're seeing in the backdrop is part of work done for something that we call the Related Study Project, right? It's called an RSP. So this is where you visit a specific context, and again, rural, semi-rural, remote. And if you think about how many villages there are, for example, in Karnataka alone, I don't have a number. I'm sure it's that vast, right? But what we have been doing every year there is one batch that will visit one of these villages, right? And the batches are so large now. Like initially we had smaller batches, but now with a 80 intake, we divide them into at least 2 groups. So each batch is visiting 2 villages. And typically we try to do it according to climatic zones. So if one group is going to a hot and dry zone, the other goes to a hot and humid zone. And in this case, these guys went to Himachal, to a very interesting, like a kind of a, frigid and dry zone kind of a thing, right? And you come back with incredible insights on regional building systems, right? And you come back with a lot of observations on how do people in a particular context, plan their houses, or what kind of public spaces matter to them. How do they, for example, celebrate their festivals, and thereby what are this? It's again very much rooted in the idea of space, but the point is that it is a context that probably most of us didn't even know about, or most people wouldn't even know about. So there is this initiative where we are building a repository of all of these studies, and they're all essentially repositories of villages, right? Like Does it require a lot more data? Yes, it does. But as a starting point, it's a very interesting sort of a region-based repository. So we're trying to, as of now, make it a little bit more Karnataka-focused. Yes, there are interesting villages all over, yes, but we're starting with whatever's around us, right? And what makes them very distinct contexts.
Wow.
So
you end up mapping a lot of villages.
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And that is again happening because of what happens in the studio. The another sort of again recent development is and this is something that I am personally sort of involved in. So like I said, we are very interested in how we teach history, theory, and the humanities in this college. And I think that is definitely something that is unique, because I think it is a great, wonderful coincidence that so many people who are interested in history and theory of architecture sort of ended up at the same place. It tells you something maybe also about the kind of environment that has been created. It's like what you asked, right? There is no immediate application to history and theory, but it is like a constant underlying thread, right? It's there. Like, for example, if you ask yourself, why do you find a particular frame beautiful? Or, forget beautiful, why does it make you feel a certain kind of harmony or a certain kind of peace? You will find that some of these responses have been universal across contexts. People have, for example, used columns a certain way, or decided to create this idea of a courtyard where you surround a space with things that are responding to it and that it can respond to. These are all universal conditions. And it is very possible to understand an underlying pattern over there, figure out what the right proportions could be and all of that, right? So as a result, we have this idea of a domain that is to do with history, theory, and the humanities, which is more to do with what are the dialogues that we are enabling by teaching these subjects. It's not about what is the syllabus. We don't even go there. We go into what more are we bringing over here and why, right? So it started, for example, with a simple thing like we decided that, there are 8 of us. Let's just start watching movies together and we'll talk about those movies. So it began with a little discussion like that. And we just figured out that we realized that that's a lot of fun. And then we did it a few more times. And then we also realized that there is another kind of I don't know what to call it, whether one would call it a problem or a condition or what. A lot of academic writing and academic literature is very dense. Very, very, like, it takes multiple readings to even get to what they're trying to say. And we need to acknowledge the fact that many of us are very visual learners, right? And most people are, the spectrum of learning itself is so vast that writing an academic paper or being able to read an academic paper and crunch through it cannot be the only way you measure somebody's merit or what value they can offer. So thereby, if you look at it by extension at publishing and what do we publish and how do we publish and how do we put out our content, I think it led to, again, a kind of an experiment where we thought, let's put together our methods, but not as a typical, sort of an academic publication, but something which very much acknowledges the fact that attention spans are dwindling. People are probably interested in reading but are unable to read because the content that they come across can be super dense. It can be difficult to access. Maybe people are more in the habit of making lists for what they can do rather than doing it immediately. So these are all tendencies that exist in us. So how do we still maybe put out a resource that is helpful and useful but not, oppressive? So then we collectively, and I edited this, but it is a collection of methods that, the people who have been teaching history and theory over here have been employing for the past 8 or 10 years, where you are basically, it's a collection of recommendations, it's a collection of exercises, and then that led to setting up the press. So again, the mandate with the press is like, I would say, if I had to put it in one word, it's to make knowledge accessible, and accessible not just in a physical form, but in an intellectual form also, by recognizing that there are different types of learners and that there are different formats in which knowledge can be put forth. So the press sort of is in that space. The heritage walks that we do. The heritage walks, again, is an initiative by a colleague of mine, Julie and Tharakan. And the manner in which this has been set up is also quite wonderful. It's about, okay, we all live in Mysore. How much do we truly know about the city? How much do we truly know about what each of these places are, what they meant? Were they something else before they became what they became, right? And is it transforming into something else now, right? So for someone who is either from Mysore, even not from Mysore, a lot of these stories are either, very vaguely known or not known at all. What this Heritage Walk cell does is it invites interested students, right? So within our midst who come, they do the research, they together, sort of plan what the route for the walk should be. So it started off with one walk. Now we have 4 walks, of which 2 are cycling tours. And there's one called Memories of the Land. There's one called Bazaars of Mysore. And then there are like 2 cycling tours that take you on 2 very different loops. And the great thing again is that it is driven purely by student and faculty initiative, right? They are the researchers, they are the hosts. And for like a very nominal fee, we take people around. And the best part is that a lot of people who come on the walks are old-timers of Mysore. So they exchange stories about that place when they're on the walk. So that continues to sort of enrich our, sort of base. What this particular walk does is it introduces you to Mysore as a very, important hub of commerce at one point of time. And a lot of the spaces that we see now used to be extremely vibrant bazaars, right? And again, different patrons. Like, for example, there's this interesting building called the Singer Building in the heart of Mysore city. And associated with it is the Freemasons Hall, right? So this whole idea that the Freemasons Guild was something that even had a presence in Mysore, I think is in itself like a big sort of a whoa moment for a lot of people. The fact that, the sewing machine company had a whole, establishment over here, like, and a lot of little things, right? Like there are these trading communities that came in from different states and they ended up sort of having an area over here. Again, these are things that are commonplace in most cities because cities ultimately are just born out of exchange, right? But it's important to know what forms of exchange took place in your city. Rather than just looking at Mysore as a set of buildings with a certain kind of heritage value, it also gets into the more contemporary, later parts of the history. It gets into this whole idea of patronage. You realize how important it is to have the right patrons for a city to have a certain kind of culture. If you don't have patrons who see value in it, you would end up with something completely different, right? And again, as a city, I feel like it's a city that has a very educated citizenry. And it's changing, no doubt. But I feel like there is a lot that happens here that is not known in the mainstream, but is definitely happening, and they're all driven by citizens. Institution gets to be a part of that.
Institution indeed contributes to the place it's situated in, right?
Yeah.
So you take that as a responsibility to add different flavor to Mysore, different lens for people to see their own city.
Yeah. Then we have something known as the incubation cell, which is where prospective clients, usually these are pro bono projects, you can come with, let's say, you need help with preparing a proposal or you need help with a design project or something like that. We offer our services, we offer our consultancy. right? So there is that one aspect also. So for example, one of the things that we are working on is also building, like, let's say, a digitized map of the city that can be accessed by tourists and visitors and things
Wow.
like that. They are small but significant projects which are not just about making buildings but also about reinforcing connections with the place, right?
Interesting
There's a lot of
projects.
that happens.
So now I want to see what students are making. So I want to see, I mean, again, it's subjective to your taste or to your thing. I want to see your top 3 students' favorite work. Like that, in a sense, that I would get a sense of what students are going through or what are they making, what are they doing as part of their course. So I want to walk through students' project detail by detail.
We write our own academic frameworks, and one of the frameworks is where we look at this idea of how are we scaling complexity from first to 10th semester, right? And I'll maybe just talk about what we do in the design studios, right? So it begins with in your first semester, you begin by just sort of understanding your bodily limits and the kind of space that one person would require for any kind of activity, really, like a single user space of any kind, right? And these projects, again, tend to be a little bit speculative in nature because in first semester, you just want to introduce them to the possibilities rather than, the immediate limitations. So here we just, it could be a space that you're designing for yourself or for an imagined client, or for example, what the current first years are doing is imagining a space for themselves in 2050, which I find an interesting proposition, right? It's like imagining what this version of yourself is going to even want, And from there, you move on to, let's say, of course, like a slightly more complex idea. You realize that the house is the most common built typology that has ever existed. Like, you will always need to build houses and people will always need to be housed. So from first to fourth, you're basically looking at the house in different formats, right? So in the first, you're just looking at this idea of a space for one person. And there again, it can be a little bit fluid. We don't give a context, we don't give a site. It can be imagined. They can place it wherever they want. It's usually like that. In second, you bring in the complexity of a setting, right? You say that, okay, we are going to be working with this neighborhood park and its surroundings. Now, you tell us what you think will be appropriate for this place, right? And then we provide some area limitations and things like that. In the third semester, we situate it in this context of the related study program where we have been to a very specific context and we're trying to understand. One is, of course, one main mandate is to document the place, right, in a relatively, sort of a reliable manner, measure, draw, understand whose properties have you documented, why is this, what is it an example of? Is it an example of, a regional response to climate? How do you understand how people use space over here? And thereby, what does it, does it make sense as a project to propose something which is relevant at a public level, or do you just want to maybe add on to this house? So again, faculty have interpreted these constraints differently. So we have had small scale public projects, and this time what they're doing is, like, you look at, these large family houses that are going into deep neglect, and you think about, do they require any more facilities? Does this house require retrofitting, or does it require a whole extension? By the time you get to fourth, you're looking at mass housing, which is very complex. And again, the verdict is, sort of divided on whether you need to do housing when you're in a younger semester or in an older semester, when you have a little bit more, sort of awareness. We do it in the fourth semester, and here you're basically, again, talking about the difference between somebody owning a home in a private property and somebody having to, share housing with 30 other families, 100 other families, or whatever. What does density mean? What does it mean to share common resources? How thick should walls be? How do you think about privacy when so many people are occupying the same thing together? How do you think about a balance between privacy for you and your family versus you being part of a larger community, right? So incrementally, the complexity, we're looking at everything to do with residences and this idea of living in a space from the first to fourth. And then in the fifth is where we bring in public architecture. And we've had some really wonderful public architecture studios, right? And different contexts from, there was this one, once there was a project that was for the earlier, one of the earliest batches, it was set in Mangalore and again had an element of, adaptive reuse attached to it, right? It's a very important question to ask when you're intervening in a larger, sort of a city context as to if you have this old building over here, what do you want to do with it? Do you want to give it a new lease of life? Do you want to bring it down? Do you think that this typology is fully irrelevant now and you don't want to do anything with it? So adaptive reuse is very challenging because it also requires very precise material and structural system knowledge. But as a premise, it's very, very promising, right? We typically end up, again, doing a lot of culture-oriented buildings in the fifth semester. But like I said, usually by the time you get to the fifth semester, you take your students to visit this place and you want them to tell you what do you think this place needs, right? And that what this place needs should evolve from a conversation. So there was also a very nice semester where both groups went to Kerala, but one half went to Kozhikode and the other went to Fort Kochi. And they realized that they both have very different vibes as places, even though they're along the same coast. One is very, very tourist favoring and the other one is completely cognizant of local culture. So even though you're along the same edge, the kind of responses, the kind of programs that came out were very different. In the sixth semester, you're dealing with the question of what's an institution. How do we design schools? How do we design our colleges? Does it make a difference if it is law college or a dental college? Do you design differently over here? Do people learn differently in different classrooms, right? Is there something known as the identity of a college and does that need to be expressed by a building? So you start getting into that question. And again, what is, depending on whether the context of the college itself, what is it offering back to its context, right? Then overall, there is this larger idea of sustainability that has also been pushed very strongly by the university. So I think as far as sustainability is concerned, I don't want to talk a lot, but it is definitely interesting to consider what are the different forms of sustainability that exist, right? So, for example, in one of the seventh semester studios, one of the faculty brought in this perspective that you need to have a business plan also. They were designing an industrial building, but it was like, okay, like what's the business plan here? Why is your building a certain way? Like, how do you imagine that you're going to take banana fiber and turn it into a business, or you're going to take textile, waste and turn it into a business? So they were again picked very interesting contexts. Like there was one in Hampi, there was one in Tirupur. So the thing is, there you're not necessarily again thinking about the building as a beautiful aesthetic experience, but you're thinking about systems, you're thinking about workflows, you're thinking about how do goods make it from point A to point B, and thereby how do you simplify the circulation of a building? And then how the building expresses itself is again up to each person, right? In the eighth semester is when we do this whole architecture in an urban context, in the sense that there is a small element of urban design involved. So there again, depending on which city you pick, the complexities are different. Wow. The first UD studio I was part of was set in Mysore. The other one I was part of was set in Trivandrum. So each city comes with its own mandate. And I think when you sort of surrender to the questions that the context is asking you, it's usually very rich. But where it gets finally incredibly interesting is when it comes to the thesis. And we've had a range of projects from across the batches, right? There are people who get into very socially oriented projects in the sense that the concern from the get-go is to do with a social issue. One thing that we always ask them to consider is architecture going to offer a problem for this a solution for this social issue, or are you kidding yourself that architecture can do something over here? So we've had a very interesting project where a student was just looking at public toilets and the design of public toilets, and what is a good public toilet, and what can it be? Should it be something that's deployable? Should it be something that is fixed? How do you address the aspect of gender and safety when it comes to public toilets? There was another rather nice thesis project where one of our students was looking at the idea of food and slowness, and how does this act of, preparing your own food, growing your own food, and then sharing this food that you have prepared, how does it sort of make people stay in a place for longer? All of these, again, feel like very simple but very profound questions. So the thing is, you have to have a good question to start with that will keep you in it, at least engaged in it for the next 2 semesters, because we typically commence thesis 1 semester before. 1 semester is for conversations and the second semester is for action.
Wow.
So in the 8th semester, we have something called a thesis seminar where we bring in, there'll be like a series of lectures planned where each of the people who's presenting something is talking about how to approach this thesis, right? And then they're largely encouraged to go talk to as many people as they want, try and figure out who they want their guide to be and all of that. And in the 9th semester, you're just working on that. You do all your research, you do all your soul searching in your 8th semester, and in the 9th, you come ready to act on it. That's the whole thing. There was one very interesting thesis project where a student was very interested in this library that was started by a sanitation worker. And his idea of a library was, it's a place where people read books. So with whatever makeshift material that was available to him, he created a little shed or a couple of sheds and then stored his books over there, and people would come there and read. But that library was burned down because of some language clash, ideologies based on language, Urdu versus Kannada and all of that, right? So her project was redesigning this library in a way that a common man can build it. You don't need a lot of specialized material. You just need the help of yourself and your community. So, using simple things like corrugated sheets and, plastic and everything that you supposedly consider unsustainable, but it's a sustainable mode of operating if you don't need specialized labor to come in and erect this for you. So her thesis went in that direction. But there is also some very interesting thesis projects that are going in a very speculative direction where you're thinking about distant futures and how the whole attitude towards architecture might change. So these are people who, for example, use very interesting methods to their thesis, again, is not a elaborately written academic paper, but for example, they use the graphic novel or the comic book as a format to represent their thoughts, right? So there was one student who chose this mode, and his thesis was about, we have so many defunct, shopping malls that are,
ghost malls.
Yeah, ghost malls in our cities. Like, what could these ghost malls be in the future? Because you've already pumped so much material and labor and effort, resource into putting up this thing. So how do we think about these sort of large format buildings in a way that they themselves are endlessly adaptable, right? That was a really fascinating one. There was one, and some of the models that are over here are also of that one particular project, where the student was thinking about what happens when our, coastal cities start to get flooded. Can we have floating cities, or can we at least have, housing that is, capable of floating, right? So there are a lot of projects that go into that speculative direction. There are a lot that are rooted in very simple everyday causes. And there are many where you find them going back to their, like I was saying earlier, you go back to your hometown or, your village, and you try and see if you can add some value there. So there was one that recently won an award, which was about high density housing. how do you, again, have high density housing where people still have some dignity of living,
Balancing
Yeah.
dignity versus
Yeah.
density.
Yeah. Yes.
Interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Why did it get an award? Like, what was different
I
here?
think what won it an award was definitely the fact that there was some kind of economic awareness that was demonstrated in the project. It wasn't purely operating in the realm of ideas and design alone, right? Another housing thesis project, which was very interesting. This person began with a real estate survey by looking at this idea of affordability and how much money do you need to shell if you want to buy a house, and how big is this house? Is it an apartment? How much are you shelling out for 1,500 square feet apartment? Yeah. What can 50 lakhs get you? What can 1 crore get you? Why is land value higher in some places than others? And what is a reasonable model of housing to employ over here so that you're not spending maybe your entire savings, but let's say within 30 to 35 lakhs, you're still getting a good house or a good apartment. Now, what does that basically means? You're thinking about, you're reassessing how, again, spatial resource gets allocated within a thing. You're making it high density, but again, density, dignity, how are you balancing the two? And none of them are perfect solutions, by the way. But what is interesting is that people are thinking about this. And young people are thinking about this. And a lot of projects actually in the thesis, it's interesting to see that you will have, in a batch of 80, you will have at least 10 people who are dealing with the idea of housing without us imposing it on them. There are increasingly, across the world, you do see a sort of a rising interest in imagining what interplanetary settlements would be like.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Terraforming and settlements in Mars and
Yes.
moon bases.
Yeah. So there
Wow.
again, my whole thing is, how do you decide if this is a good project, right? How does even a juror say that, hey, you have done this well? We don't have the...
Do students take up such projects? Yeah.
We've had one on Mars and one on the moon, I think. If you ask me, are they good projects? I don't know. I'll just say, okay.
No, you don't have to bring architects
Yeah.
for it. You have to bring scientists to evaluate.
Yeah.
Even because they have to take the magnetic field of Mars,
Yeah.
then radiation influx, soil type, those things, which are different constraints than on Earth. Like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
That is a nice thesis to work on.
Yeah.
How much time do they spend on thesis?
Thesis, if you look at it as a whole, your process takes you a year. So in your 8th semester, you're doing what is called the pre-thesis, which is like where you have this whole seminar system where one day, like, you'll start with talking about, okay, like, how do you even come up with the right question? And then you move on to analyzing the opportunities and constraints of and the do's and don'ts associated with your project. And by the end of your 8th semester, you should have a reasonable proposal. And you should have, let's say, commenced the research work on what it is, or ideally at least be midway through it, so that you get your 9th semester to just design the thing. That is ideal situation. But then a lot of people continue their research well into the 9th semester as well, because they use their break time to go travel to wherever they want to situate it, or if they want to go see some live projects and come back. So yeah, you're basically doing thesis from halfway through your 4th to halfway through your 5th.
You mean it starts with the question? Thesis is like foundation of a thesis is a question.
Yeah.
How does it look like?
For example, with the library project, it didn't start off as a library project. It began with a question of democratic forms of protest in cities, and do our cities enable them?
Do our cities enable democratic form of protest?
Yeah.
Question mark.
Yeah.
And the whole thesis is based on that question mark.
Yes. Because that is such a vast question, and you can't just say that as an architect I'm going to design a town hall and thereby my response is democratic, because you can police that town hall, you can make it inaccessible. It's administration that ultimately determines how people are allowed to use space or not. But
Wow.
So you have to constantly put your question under the scanner of what can architecture do over here? What can architecture, or the other question of what can an architect do over here? Because the academic constraint that we come with is that you have to have designed something that can be called a building by the end of this. Okay, I think that's where it becomes important, because it gets you to question what is it that we can truly do, and rather than trying to solve unsolvable problems through architecture, you try and find something that architecture can add value to. So that is that critical journey over there.
Your thesis depends on the quality of the question you're looking at, like question you look on.
Yeah.
That is half of the thesis.
Yeah.
Rest half of the thesis is solution for that question. I mean, okay,
The
nice.
response. Yeah.
So yeah, I think I've got a fair idea. Like I never thought of architecture education, like what goes into each level.
Yeah.
And now I see why students roam around with the cardboard and they don't sit in the classroom typically. I mean, as engineer students do. So what is this is my last question. Like what is the culture that is necessary to bring out the best in architecture students?
I would say it has to be a culture of constant engagement, right? You have to be interested in conversation. You have to be interested in dialogue. You have to be interested in sharing your ideas. Very important, you have to be interested in asking questions, because a lot of... See, the thing is, you will receive a set of instructions like that, okay? Everything can come with a manual or a pre-planned set of instructions. If you want to look at your syllabus like that, it can very well be that. If you want to look at your studio brief as a set of instructions, it can very well be that. But the people who do the best work are usually the people who ask the very, direct, simple questions like why? Why do we have to do this? And why do we have to do this way? And I think that a good institution should enable one to fearlessly ask questions.
Thank you so much for your time. It was nice talking to you.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.